Was Osama bin Laden based? No, of course not. Stop it. Stop. No, stop. No, we don't do that here. Okay? All right, let's get going. So I woke up this morning and I was ready to do some editing for some debates. If you guys have been following, I don't have an editor right now. So it takes me a little bit longer, in life and stuff. And so I was ready to put out some content. And then all of a sudden, I go on Twitter. And it turns out that all of these freaking TikTok kids are celebrating Osama bin Laden and his letter to America. So my first reaction was, I need to put my head through a wall. Jesus Christ, I can't stand TikTok and I can't stand Gen Z. But I thought about it. And I was like, well, okay. I'm going to put myself in Gen Z's shoes for a moment and try and understand what's going on. And the moment that I did that, I realized, I've got to do an ANCAP reaction to this. I have to do a reaction to this that isn't conservatives just screaming, how dare you support the terrorists? You guys are all stupid. And isn't, of course, leftist commies that are, still in their teens or in, undergrad and in college and think that that they have the whole world figured out because they read some people explain Marx to them and they haven't ever read Marx. Because the American right is, God, nothing gets their jimmies rustled. Nothing brings the neocon out of them more than talking about September 11th. For all of you guys that are younger and didn't live through 9/11, like us millennials and older people did, it was a wild time. It was a wild time. Like, everyone that is a libertarian now was considered part of the left during that time because we were against the war. We were against the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war. We were trying to explain to people blowback from generations of bombing campaigns and setting up countries and things. And so once I started thinking about that, I realized these kids, these Gen Z people, and I'm sorry if I'm calling you kids. Some of you are adults. I get it, but like, to me, as someone that's older, I just kind of view you as like younger, so I just use the term kids. But Gen Z has never really had a moment, I think. Not really, not until now with this current conflict in Palestine /Israel /Judea, whatever the hell you want to call it, has never really had a time to see the media just lie through their teeth in an obvious way. And I think you guys are starting to see, and I'm speaking to Gen Z directly now, you guys are starting to see something that you haven't seen because the media has been mostly in support of progressive politics. Obviously, they haven't moved as fast as the younger generation wants, and they're not quite as communist enough for you. But for the most part, the media has supported you every step of the way. And I think now with the blatant war propaganda that is going on, much, much worse than the Ukraine situation. Like, as much as we were invested in Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine, nobody's talking about it right now. Nobody's talking about the failed counteroffensive in the Ukraine that's going on. Because it doesn't have the same political power as the evangelicals tied to Israel and the alt-right people that are super anti-Semitic and the constant Marxist versus Western fight that has been occurring in Palestine, for I guess in the beginning, Israel was a very socialist nation. So, this is really, you can't say the whole time, but certainly after the 6 Days War, you could say considered a Western ally. Versus kind of a more Marxian oppressed class. And so I thought about that. And I thought about the fact that, like, what would it be like to be a 19, 18, 17-year-old kid? And the media has kind of been on your side, kind of been debunking right-wingers saying stupid things. And then you kind of begin to see the world as you grow and see the media is just working for the corporate elite and the military industrial complex, and is pumping out propaganda to try and gain American support to go to war with Israel against a group of people caged into a very small area and blockaded, that are fighting an imperial power, and realizing that the media will just lie through their teeth for this. And then kind of hearing other sides of the story for the first time. Now, of course, there's a lot of BS there. And so as an ANCAP, as a libertarian, as an anarchist that is against the state, against American imperialism, but also as someone that is rational enough to be against Islam, because no sane, rational person is pro-Islam. Islam is a murderous and hateful ideology. And it's mystical. It's mysticism. It's anti-reason. It's anti-thought. It's anti-liberal. It's anti-left. It's anti. I mean, it can be pro-right-wing in some of its capacity, sure. And of course, there is the cafeteria religion that most people in the Western society, especially younger people, are used to. I think you guys didn't really grow up with so much of the fear-mongering against Islam, so you didn't see so many things because it's not something the media is focused on. Maybe some of you guys don't know these things. I'm sure most of you guys have heard that, Muhammad was a violent conqueror who also sexually molested a 9-year-old girl, Aisha. Right? And then some of you are discovering for the first time that, Aisha did a bunch of cool progressive things, whatever. Right? Maybe some of you guys don't know that in Islam, the punishment for leaving the religion of Islam is death. The punishment for apostasy is death. Maybe some of you guys don't know that a woman's word is worth half of that in court. Maybe some of you guys don't know that there's a reason they stone gay people to death. That's what fundamentalist Islam's interpretation of the Quran, and specifically, I'm sure many of you don't know, that the Hadith is a means of reinterpreting Islam that is used for political powers. And fundamentalist Islam almost always is very, very similar to fascism in that it reinforces conservative elements for political power. And in some ways you could blame, certainly you could give a portion of the blame to Western imperialism in the Middle East and in Africa as a means of furthering these radical ideas that go beyond what Islam might be. But Islam is an enemy to all those that are free thinkers, to all those that value the freedom of speech and freedom of the individual. All of those kind of liberal ideas that the left has slowly eroded for their own kind of further progressive forms of equality, but still ostensibly hold. And so, I know I'm ranting, but it is wild to me to see so many different angles here that you have the younger generation discovering the lies and the atrocities of the American empire, and at the same time so willing and so oddly willing to ally themselves with who are their enemies. Make no mistake, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, if you will, in a more modern context, is absolutely not just the enemy to the West. They are an enemy to every American, every Christian, every Muslim who's left the faith, every atheist, every Jew, every person is at best to be their slave in the new desired empire, that the caliphate, that the promise to God must be to force the entire world into submission in. I mean, the name Islam translates to submission to the will of God. That is what it is. You will submit or else, right? Whereas Israel is to struggle with God, right? That is what it means to think critically and struggle and fight to live up to the expectations. Christianity is, to follow in Christ's way. He might have flipped over a few tables, but he wasn't out here committing genocide. And so this idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend is an absurdity. Because in one way, yes, Osama bin Laden was the enemy of the enemy for all those that wish to stop the American imperialism and the fight for the petrodollar and this control over the world, that is slipping away slowly so that they can control a currency that maintains power and wealth for an elite class that leech off of the poor and the middle class that's destined to crumble at some point. And yet, it's also important to recognize that he was the enemy of everyone. He was the enemy of all Western people simply for being Western. He was the enemy of liberalism. He was certainly an enemy to the LGBTQ community, right? He wanted you all stoned and dead. And so this idea that like, well, maybe he was based, his letter to America was based, is something. But even crazier to me was how many, well, not crazier, I should say. I'm not surprised by anything that happens on that godforsaken place known as TikTok. But the thing that was even more so frustrating was that people were reading excerpts of a very small letter as a means of showcasing how good this is and how it's changing their opinions. And that's fine if it's the first time you've been exposed to it. But it's crazy when you read the whole thing. And so we're going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of read it so that you can have it in one context. And then give a kind of a libertarian perspective on this that isn't a Christian evangelical perspective, that isn't a neocon, we got to fight them over there so they don't fight us over, so we don't have to fight them over here kind of perspective. But also isn't this silly, nonsensical, uncritical thought that is being promulgated by the left currently. And this idea that Osama bin Laden might have been one of the good guys, or that this is just what fighting for freedom looks like. No, this isn't what fighting for freedom looks like. We'll go through that. And to Gen Z, finally, this is my olive branch. Millennials, we do get it, right? Maybe Gen X doesn't get it. Gen X partied as the world burned, drinking alcohol and doing cocaine. And now they're on Facebook, all of a sudden reinterested in politics, having no idea what the heck is going on. No idea or understanding of the things that the things that you've been through. But now that they're kind of financially suffering in a way that the boomers aren't, and now that they're seeing all the wokeness infect schools and other things, they want to have an opinion, but they're swinging in the dark. And certainly not the boomers. We get that so much. We understand. We grew up with this war on terror nonsense. We grew up with Occupy Wall Street. I was there. We were there. We were the 99% fighting against the banks, against big corporations, against government doing nothing and allowing their rich friends to get richer while the rest of us suffered and the economy collapsed. And then, of course, lesbian, bunny rabbit fur babies came in and started taking over spaces and saying white men didn't belong. And lo and behold, Lockheed Martin and, the big banks put a rainbow flag on their freaking Facebook page. And all of a sudden, everything was forgiven. And so forgive us if we're against your progressive politics and your queer theory, because we see it as an enemy. But understand that we do get it. Many of us do. We lived through this. We're not just an out of touch group of people that don't understand the problems of our society. Right? We're just liberals. Right? We don't want war and we don't want taxes. That's what most of us are. Some of us, are following you down the woke train that leads to the same place it's always led. Good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, if you will. And we see that, most of us. That's why we're not with you. But on this, please, just listen to us for a minute. Osama bin Laden was not based. Okay? These politics are not good politics just because they happen to showcase some of the lies of the American media. And if you see these lies of the American media and you see this occurring, then maybe, just maybe, you can better understand that when we grew up with this, maybe you can understand why people like Trump or like the MAGA Republicans, right? Why they call the American media the enemy of the people. It's not because they're fascists that want to. It's not because they're Mussolini that wants to come in and sweep. Some of them are. Some of them are. Matt Walsh, I'm looking at you. Right. Some of them are. All right. But we're not all fascists coming to take over the institutions and crowd them out because the brown shirts are here. Though, if the brown shirts, you guys, keep crowding the institutions, that's what you're going to get. It's not a threat because it's not me that wants to do it. It's just how the right always reacts. It's how it's always borne out. But no, we say this is the stuff that you're just now finding. This is the reason we say the media is the enemy of the people. Okay, it's not just conspiracy theories. When a right winger screams at you that they're trying to kill the farms in the Netherlands, and you call us a crazy right-wing conspiracy theorist, and then you cite CNN articles at us, like, don't you get it? Like, are you seeing now? Are you seeing now that the media has been lying to us all, and that there are truths that are spoken even by our enemies, and that it's important. You know, there was this moment in the presidential debates following 9/11 where Ron Paul was there, and we were asked. The American public was asking themselves after 9/11, why? Why did this? Why? Why did you do this? What the hell did we do? And so when we asked Republicans this, what was stated, what was said was, they hate us because of our freedoms. That's why they hate us. They hate us because we're Christian. We're a Christian nation that stands on Christian ideals. They hate us because we're freedom people. And we all knew that this was lies and bullcrap. And there was Ron Paul right there saying, no, they hate us because we've been bombing them for 50 years. They hate us because of the Ayatollah that we said that had to take over after the Shah was established in Iran. They hate us because we're funding them and invading, Mogadishu and Somalia in 93. They hate us because we've been involved in their politics. They hate us because we used IMF loans and terrorism of our own kind to set up, to set countries up for failure so that they would constantly be indebted to the International Monetary Fund. Read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And so many of us millennials, we grew up and we saw this and we saw these lies. And I'm sorry that you're just now seeing it, because the history books written by these same fuckers don't tell this side of the story. And so let's go through it, and let's go through this. Let's read it, and let's talk about why this also isn't our friend. This isn't a letter from people that care about us. This is a letter from people that want to kill Americans just for being Americans and want to kill the Jews just for being Jews. And this is their proselytization effort. It's also important to recognize that this letter to America was designed to create turmoil in America. It was designed to only report half of the story as a means of gaining sympathy from Americans in the hopes that protests and the left would destabilize the war effort and stop the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, which, should have. Well, I guess it's 2002, so not Afghanistan. But to stop, the hunting for Al Qaeda. And we need look no further than the CIA, but, I didn't say that. So let's go through this. This supposedly sympathetic letter that really makes us understand how America's evil and how, it was justified, quote unquote, September 11th, killing thousands of people that were just office workers at the World Trade Center, people working on banking shit, people working at cubicles. Let's go through it. So the first thing that I noticed is that nobody was reading the intro, which is, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Permission to fight against disbelievers is given to those believers who are fought against, because they have been wronged, and surely Allah is able to give them believers victory. Right? It's a fairly it's militant, but there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? You could put that in any, beyond the fact that it's a religious text. But here we have the second one. Those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of Tagut, anything worshipped other than Allah, example, Satan. So fight you against the friends of Satan. Ever feeble is indeed the plot of Satan. So anyone that doesn't fight under the banner of Islam is a Satanist or a friend of Satan, and all fights against them are justified by God. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about both Islam and Osama bin Laden. Is that very idea, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but further than that, it is all death of everyone that isn't a Muslim is justified. We will kill you all, we will burn the world until we establish the caliphate, and we will be heroes. We will be the good guys for the murder and rape and pillage of the world. These are not your friends. So this is where everyone else starts on TikTok when they read little excerpts. Some American writers have published articles under the title, "On What Basis Are We Fighting?" These articles have generated a number of responses, some of which adhere to the truth and were based on Islamic law, and others of which have not. Here we wanted to outline the truth as an explanation and warning, hoping for Allah's reward, seeking success and support from him. So again, we're going to tell you our side of the story, which we deem to be the truth as to why we are fighting, which is fine. I mean, you should indeed listen to why they're fighting in some regard. This is an important document to better understand what their motivations were. That doesn't make them right. But of course, it's also a warning. It's also letting you know we will kill you for your white skin and your Christian faith. We will murder you, like the heathens that you are for not following and submitting to Allah. And Allah will reward us for the murder of you. It sounds hyperbolic, but it is. That's what he means by a warning. It's a terrorist organization that murdered thousands of Americans. And God, and pause. Another thing. There was this term that nobody ever understood, and it's fallen out of favor, but millennials will remember, and older will remember. Insurgent. And people were always like, insurgent. There was a left or libertarian response often that we would hurl at other people at the time. Well, we're the Americans, we're the ones who have inserted ourselves there. Aren't we the insurgents? And, the typical right-wing response was always, well, no. We're not insurgents because because the people there want us there to protect them. And everyone's like, well, that doesn't sound right. Right. And it's not. But it's also important to note that what Al-Qaeda would do, this terrorist organization that people believe, might have been based and that they were right, is that they would show up in towns of their own people. They'd murder a bunch of people and throw their bodies in a ditch somewhere, toss them off to the side. They'd rape their women. They'd sell their children into sex slavery for, wealthy traveling merchants of that kind of thing that wanted to buy virginity and things like that from little 12-year-old boys and girls, mostly boys. And then what they would do is they would take a man and they'd put a gun to his head and they'd give him a radio and a motorbike. And they'd say, we're going to torture and murder and rape your wife and kill her in front of you if you don't take this radio and this motorcycle and go up the street and tell us when the Americans are coming. Like, these were the people that we were fighting against. And we had no right to be there. We had no right to be in Iraq. Certainly not. Not really in Afghanistan either. Maybe you could make an argument in Kandahar and places on the border of Pakistan where Al-Qaeda was actually operating from. Certainly not Iraq. Iraq was just an excuse for Bush to, continue the fight of Daddy's war that he lost. And also, of course, create, new institutions and power and secure things. We were in Afghanistan so that we could control the poppy fields and, for the opioids that we were pumping into Americans as we began the fentanyl crisis that we saw beginning in the 90s and 2000s. We had to pump that that Oxycontin for everyone. So we had to make sure that we had control of the poppy seed fields in Afghanistan. We had to make sure that the petrodollar was safe and that, we set up, whatever democracies we needed in the Middle East. Certainly had no right to be there. We're indeed insurgents, but so were they. And so they were killing their own people for Allah's reward. So even here, they're hypocrites. While seeking Allah's help, we form our reply based on two questions directed at the Americans. One, why are we fighting and opposing you? And two, what are we calling you to and what do we want from you? So, of course, this letter to the Americans. Here's why we are fighting you and what do we want from you? As for the first question, we are fighting and opposing you. Why we are fighting and opposing you, sorry. The answer is very simple. One, because you attacked us and continue to attack us. Now, this is absolutely true, right? This is absolutely true. And so we're going to go through this, not like a neocon, right? Not like a shill for the state of Israel, is this beautiful, wonderful thing. But also, let's cut through the bullshit here. So letter A, you attacked us in Palestine. Well, who's us? It's important to recognize what he means by us here first, which is that Al-Qaeda presumably is fighting for all of the Muslim people, all of the Muslim faith, all of the Islamic world, except for the Shias that they're killing and all the people that they're killing in their fights to do so. But that's okay. They're martyrs. Those people will be happily sacrificed to Allah. They've already submitted and love Allah. Because if they didn't, we'd kill them for not loving Allah. So we'll kill you if you don't love Allah. If you love Allah, then you'll happily be our sacrifices in the fight. And if you're a Shia, well, you're just wrong, so we'll kill you too. But setting all of that aside, when they say us, they mean Muslims. I mean the Islamic world. That's why there is solidarity with Palestine here when Palestine is not, it's just not like an Al-Qaeda affiliate. There's nothing going on there. Hamas is barely an organization at this point. And so we'll continue, Palestine, which has sunk under military occupation for more than 80 years. Which is interesting, right? Because more than 80 years, this is 2002. So this would be 1902 and longer, 1922 and longer has been sunk under military occupation. So yeah, there's the British, sure. There'd be military occupation of that region. You could say the Ottoman Empire, but maybe not do that because it was okay when the Ottoman Empire controlled and abused these people and didn't care about them because those were Muslims. But continue. The British handed over Palestine with your help and your support to the Jews. The Jews, who have occupied it for more than 50 years. Years overflowing with oppression, tyranny, crimes, killing, expulsion, destruction, and devastation. So yeah, some of this is true, right? If you've seen some of my content, you've seen other people, especially the Gen Z people watching. Yeah, there's absolutely been destruction, expulsion, crimes, tyranny, oppression, devastation, killing. Certainly not a one-sided thing. It didn't magically start in 1948, and it wasn't that we just magically gave the Americans supported giving Jews a state. Sure, yeah, Jews that lived there, Jews that homesteaded land there, land that supported a population of 2 million before the diaspora caused by the Roman Empire, and was a few 100,000 at most. That existed during the time that Jews came in during the Zionist movement. People that bought land. Now, some of that land might have been improperly bought. It needs to go by case basis. Where do they buy that land from? Wealthy Arabs in the Ottoman Empire, that owned portions of land. They purchased that land and built towns and settlements, and then irrigated farmland and turned swamps into lush crops. And then Palestinian population grew there while living with the Jews because the Jews were so amazing to the Palestinian people in terms of providing them jobs and food and security. But of course, religious tensions are what they are. Several attacks by Muslims worried that there were too many Jews, or of course just hated the Jews, killing these people, starting riots. These things go back and forth. Of course, the Jews respond by creating militia groups that hate Muslims and start crimes against them. So there's no good guys really in this story, but the idea that the Jews and that Israel are these uniquely bad guys, the Muslims didn't do nothing, right, is an absurdity. It's half the story. There's been killing and warfare and things in this region on both sides, and now we go, but this is the Jews' fault because you let Jews live here. Okay, but the Palestinians never had a king. Palestinians didn't have a government until 1995, and that was the Palestinian Authority, and they still refuse to set forward a government in a parliament or some form of liberal democracy or shit, even a king like in Jordan, right? They refused every step of the way and instead decided to use terrorist attacks and aligned with communists to try and overthrow countries and murder and expel everyone within the countries. That is what the Palestinian people, by and large, have preferred, or at least their leadership have preferred. Now, I don't blame the people of Palestine, certainly not the people stuck in Gaza, for the leadership of Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. But it is also important to recognize that, it is an absurdity, this idea that, this is just the Jewish occupation. Jews have just as much a right to the land that they occupy as does any Palestinian, with exception to individual case-by-case basis, especially in West Bank settlements in certain zones, certain pieces of property. And of course, both the 6 Days War and the 1948 expulsion, both of these have left many people that were Palestinians pushed from land that they own, that is their land. This is absolutely true. And the same has occurred to Jews. Continuing on. And of course, there's no need to explain and prove the degree of American support for Israel. He's absolutely right. There is no need. The creation of Israel is a crime which must be erased. If you are a TikTok Gen Z person and you read this, let me finish it. Let me restart it and finish it. And you read this. The creation of Israel is a crime which must be erased. Each and every person whose hands have become polluted in the contribution towards this crime must pay its price and pay for it heavily. Understand a few things here. First and foremost, he is saying we must destroy the state of Israel. We must push every Jew out of Palestine. And every tax-paying person, every Western country, every politician, every company who has profited, every person that's ever bought a chip from Intel. Do you own an iPhone? Because you're a person who has hands have become polluted in contribution towards this crime, who must pay a price and pay for it heavily. He means I'm gonna fucking kill you, you white Christian, you white atheist, you white leftist, you gay boys in Princeton University saying globalize the Intifada. We're coming for you and we're gonna kill you, whitey. That's what he's saying. Make no bones about it. And if you don't believe me, he justifies everyone that is a tax-paying American later in the letter. We'll get to it. But wake up. These are not based like anti-American imperialists just because they tell you some things that the media won't. Just because they have a side of the story about why they're fighting that you in some ways resonate with and understand because you too hate these specific things. And for the love of God, stop getting your politics in 60-second sound bites from TikTokers. Moving on. 2, it brings us both laughter and tears to see what you have not yet tired of repeating your fabricated lies that the Jews have a historical right to Palestine as it was promised to them in the Torah. Nobody makes that argument, right? Like there's a few evangelicals that make, and nobody was making that argument then, that this is like the holy land that belongs to the Jews. Yeah, there are right-wing Israelis that make that argument. Nobody else is making that argument. They're making the argument that they were expelled, that you have a collective group of people that were expelled. There's even a genetic argument that can be made that didn't really exist at this time, to be fair to the terrorist piece of shit for whatever reason, right? Genetic evidence shows that the most closely related to the Jews of that time are actually Palestinian Christians, and then Bedouins. Like, these are the people that are most genetically similar to the people that originally lived in the area. Then Palestinian Muslims, followed very closely by Jews in the region, specifically like Jews that lived in Lebanon and things like that, and then European Jews. So yes, the European Jews are less genetically similar to the people that were expelled than are the Muslims that are the Palestinian Muslims. And so you can make some of an argument there. But the problem is that the argument is that they're descended from the Jews that lived there and then were, cast out. Most of those people were cast out. So they intermarried and interbred with a lot of Europeans. And so that gene pool was diluted in a way that those that were conquered by the Muslims and then, maintained the Muslim faith and and stayed in the region, did not intermarry with and interbreed with a ton of Europeans. They interbred and intermarried with themselves and with conquering Muslims. And so, they're obviously not as closely related as the Bedouins or the Christians that are there. The 1 million plus Christians that were expelled from Lebanon have more of a claim genetically to being descended from the people expelled from the region by the Roman Empire, than both the Palestinian Muslims and European Jews. It's right, like the Maronite Christians in Lebanon that were expelled when Palestinians caused a civil war that killed 120,000 people, and expelled 1 million Christians, many of whom ended up in the West that had to flee, all because Christians had too much power. For whatever reason, not because they were actually treating anybody poorly. They just weren't communist enough. And that was, of course, after the Palestinians tried to overthrow Jordan and failed in Black September in 1971. So again, the evil Jews, and it's no mention of all of the evil shit that the Palestinians have done. Not to say that some of the shit that the Jews, or state of Israel, I should say, have done hasn't been horrible. Anyone who disputes with them on this alleged fact is accused of anti-Semitism. Yeah, this was pretty much true then. It's pretty much true now. Maybe not this specific claim, but the people that, people would call me anti-Semitic. I've been blocked for being anti-Semitic while mostly supporting Israel in their rights to do certain things. Because I'm just not full-blown magatard, right-wing, like, it's the Holy Land for the Jews. So, and of course, many Jewish organizations, left-wing Jewish organizations, account for any arguments that aren't full-blown support of Israel to be anti-Semitic. This is one of the most fallacious, widely circulated fabrications in history. The people of Palestine are Arabs and original Semites. It is the Muslims who are the inheritors of Moses, peace be upon him, and the inheritors of the real Torah that has not been changed. So, this is partially true, but again, the Palestinians that started a civil war that drove all the Christians out of Lebanon, these people were more closely related, are more original Semite than are the Muslims who invaded and took over Palestine and interbred and intermarried and, set up a bunch of slave markets and, abused those people in some cases. And in other cases, intermarried and kind of more like a Spanish conquistador, ironically enough, situation there where there was a lot of intermarrying and interbreeding. So yes, those people are indeed more closely related than are the European Zionist Jews that came over. But I fail to see how this is relevant when it is the Christians that are more closely related. It's just a lie. Muslims believe in all of the prophets, including Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. So this is true, but it is interesting to recognize here that this is Al-Qaeda propaganda, just like the media is putting on propaganda for Al-Qaeda to Americans, right? Yes, they believe in all the prophets, but they believe that those prophets, ultimately only led up to Allah, and you must be, to Muhammad, and you must be a Muslim or, you can be a convert, and you can have some rights as a second class citizen that is meant to be a slave to the Muslims. And if you're an apostate, of course, death. If you're gay, death. If you're a woman and you try and like exercise individual liberty and education, death. Just anything liberal or good, or any freedoms you try and have from Islam as it imposes its will on you, a white slave to the Muslim empire that should be abolished. Established. Yeah, sure. They believe in Jesus as a prophet, but this is propaganda, right? And they're allowed to, Islam allows you to lie for the purposes of being under threat, right? If I think it's taqwa, tarif. I can't remember the exact term, but if you're under threat, you're allowed to lie. Now, Islamic scholars that are Islamic apologists that are a little bit more cafeteria religion, right, will say, Abraham, lied about his wife, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, as a means of being able to protect his wife and his family, so that they wouldn't try and take her maiden, wouldn't try and take her as a wife, and so. And that's kind of true, and it's an interesting interpretation of that. But to these people, right, to the terrorists, to Al Qaeda and stuff, they're all on board. To the jihadists, the Muslim Brotherhood that happens, and to these other organizations that aren't necessarily full blown terrorists, but or like Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia that uses all of its money to finance terrorism throughout the world, but we don't care because we need them for the oil and the petrodollar. Because if we stopped being friends with them, the U.S. economy would collapse because trillions of dollars would come back to our market, and we'd have hyperinflation, be Weimar Republic, and the American empire would crumble. So we have to pretend to be friends with Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that Saudi Arabia spends billions creating terrorist organizations all over the world, right? Like, these people are all on board with lying. So long as those lies lead to an establishment of lead towards proselytization and an increased power towards the possibility of reestablishing the caliphate. If the followers of Moses have been promised a right to Palestine in the Torah, then the Muslims are the most worthy nation of this. And again, no, it would be the Christians. But they would be genetically more worthy than would be European Jews. If you're going simply on genetic markers, because they're both descendants of the region. It's just that the Palestinians intermarried and interbred more, right? And it's also important to note, just for the record, Muhammad was a cousin, married and fucked his cousins. And so this is an interpretation that this must be okay. And so in many places, Pakistan being one of the worst, especially Pakistani immigrants that move to other countries, such as in like southern UK, there's a very, very big problem with inbreeding. It is part of the reason why many regions of the Middle East, the average IQ is lower, aggression is higher, birth defects are higher. It doesn't really matter if you're having a bunch of babies though. Whereas once you gain money, once GDP goes up, birth rates start to decline. Some of that might be microplastics, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like our seed's all perfect here in the West. But it is important to note that under any religion, the most common inbreeding is going to be in Islam. And so because of this, you're going to have genetic markers that stick around for longer, right? Because you're dipping in the same gene pool over and over again. Whereas the Zionist European Jews that came back, they're dipping into, all of these other gene pools. So they're picking up all these other genetic markers. And so even then, like, it's not a great metric to look at just like how many genetic markers that do we share in common, right? And this is probably why the Bedouin are the most closely, or the most closely related to the genetic material of the Jews that were expelled by the Roman Empire, is because they didn't dip in any other pool, right? It's Muslims invaded, took over Palestine, and after and the Ottoman Empire moving in, the first Umayyad Caliphate, these groups that come in and invade, they bring with them new genetic markers, and so yeah, it is weird because it is only the Jews that treat ethnicity and religion kind of like together, and so the Muslims kind of have like it's hard to explain because like Islam is not an ethnicity passed upon in the same way that being a Jew is. So moving on. When the Muslims conquered Palestine and drove out the Romans, Palestine and Jerusalem returned to Islam, the religion of all the prophets, peace be upon them. Therefore, the call to a historical right to Palestine cannot be raised against the Islamic Ummah that believes in all the prophets of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, and we make no distinction between them. So this is, I don't understand his argumentation here, right? The idea being that because we recognize all prophets, therefore it's cool that we can maintain a power and control over people of the book and the region and the Holy Land, etc., because we recognize them all and the Jews don't. It's like, your religious text does, but the nation state of Israel, that's a liberal democracy, is not out here dismantling every freaking mosque that exists, right? Like, they're not out here defacing these things have happened, of course. And then, of course, there's bombs in Gaza and things like that. These things have happened. But it really is just like, it's kind of just fluff. It's bullcrap propaganda fluff. It's not a real argument because there's no reason to believe that Al Qaeda takes over Israel, that they'd keep like temples. Like, they wouldn't. They'd burn them to the ground, and we all know they would. 3, the blood pouring out of Palestine must be equally revenged. You must know that the Palestinians do not cry alone. Their women are not widowed alone. Their sons are not orphaned alone. And this is part of the threat, right? This is, we must kill you people. You Americans, you Westerners, all of you who have supported, you must all suffer the way the Palestinians have suffered, right? This is Hammurabi's code in a sense, right? Except the difference is that it's a collective punishment, right? So this isn't individuals that have perpetrated these crimes, that have intentionally done things to murder innocents shall be punished. This isn't, a soldier that wrongly shoots a child for no reason must be punished. No, it's our people suffer, and therefore you must suffer for being other than our people, or for supporting this in some way. And by way, I mean like second, third order consequences. Like, you pay taxes, therefore you are an enemy to Islam and you must be killed and wiped from the face of the earth. You white piece of shit. How dare you pay your taxes? I'm not joking. That's how these people feel. Remember that this is a propaganda piece to get you, the American, on their side. And even in it, they can't hide their disdain and desire to wipe you from the face of the earth. B, you attacked us in Somalia. You supported the Russian atrocities against us in Chechnya, the Indian oppression against us in Kashmir, and the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon. So, you attacked us in Somalia. Yeah, Mogadishu was a failed peacekeeping operation from terrorists that had taken over Somalia, and yet it was none of our fucking business, and it was a shit show, and we destabilized the region. Fair. You supported the Russian atrocities against us in Chechnya. Sort of. And of course, there's no mention here that he himself was financially supported and trained by Americans to fight the Russians in Afghanistan, right? It's, you supported us kinda when the Islamic world, right? When we were oppressed in this area, sort of. The Indian oppression against us in Kashmir, yeah, that one's just fair. That one's fair. And the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon. This is insane to me. The Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon is batshit crazy, because the Palestinian Fedayeen, after the failing of Black September in Jordan, move into Palestine. And because the Muslims have been breeding, so understand what is occurring in Lebanon at the time is that you have a three-way government, right? And the three-way government is, the president of Lebanon was a Maronite Christian, and the head of parliament was a Sunni, I believe, and then it was like the speaker of their like house kind of thing was Shia. So it was intended to be a three-way split government where every demographic group had a representative that had power, that had power. And yes, Christians were a majority when this government was set up, and so Christians had a power in the presidency. And unfortunately, as Lebanon began to modernize, what you saw is true of any nation where there are disparate IQs and where there are disparate systems of religions and cultures that support socialism and support welfare and support family growth and more children versus investment in capital for, down the road investment in business and success. And so what occurred was the Christians started becoming more and more financially successful. And as the country became more and more capitalist, and the Muslims began to outbreed them. Because as the Christians were more successful, they delayed childbirth. They were having one or two children. They were moving to other affluent countries. They were, leaving Lebanon often to go to other places. The Muslims were staying. And then, of course, there were Palestinian refugees from Jordan and in Israel. And so this process occurs over 10 years. And what ends up occurring is that the Christian majority that had the presidency with the checks and balances by the Sunni and Shia and, in parliament and the House begin to be the minority with a majority of the power. And worse, you have this kind of this how do we put it? The Cold War. Sorry, you have this Cold War occurring, and so you have the presidency trying to put down protests and things, utilizing Western help that he didn't really get. He wanted it, but he never really got it. He got a couple, he got some money every now and then, a loan every now and then, but for the most part, he really didn't get much support from the West. Whereas his enemies, the Palestinian Fedayeen and things like that, they were Soviet funded. And so you had large Soviet funding without much Western funding. As a larger demographic group begins to protest and eventually decides that they want to overthrow people because the welfare is not enough for them. What they want is the country to not have Christians and Jews. Because they're oppressing. There's no fucking oppression really going on in Lebanon. Certainly no more than was going on anywhere else in the world. Except for maybe Western democracies, and so, yeah. And so the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon comes years into the civil war in Lebanon. And after years, the Jews finally go to their northern border and start trying to save Christian Lebanese camps and people that are hauled off, being bombed over and over again by the Muslims that are trying to wipe them out. And yeah, Hezbollah now rules freaking Lebanon. I mean, they rule southern Lebanon. They rule Lebanon. They don't officially rule Lebanon, but they rule it. And so, the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon, that's what really is kicking it off. Unless we're talking about 6 Days War where, they were invaded by everybody. It's hard to understand what he means by this. But if he's talking about the Civil War, he's full of shit. But yeah, he's definitely got a point in, Indian oppression in Kashmir. That was definitely Western supported. As well as Mogadishu, that was one of our faults. It's interesting here too. I find that he doesn't mention Iran here in this because I think Iran is probably the strongest case of Western involvement over and over and over again. He certainly doesn't want to bring up Afghanistan because then people will be like, "Oh yeah, that thing that we paid you to do." Under your supervision, consent, and orders, the governments of our countries, which act as your agents, attack us on a daily basis. True. But again, us is this communal Muslim, and it's important to understand that this is collectivist garbage, just like any communist, just like all of you progressives, just like, the far right. It's collectivist nonsense. By us, he means Muslims. is the West against Muslims? No. Right? I think they're like, that's an absurdity. You got Rishi Sunak, this UK Prime Minister. Obviously, that's now and not then, but we weren't any uniquely against the Muslims, the Muzzies, then as we were there, right? Or he has the benefit of doubt of seeing Operation Provide Comfort, right? Nobody mentions Operation Provide Comfort, where we're moving Kurdish and Muslim people, as a means to escape atrocities, chronicles by us in some degrees, right? So there are plenty of operations that we're doing to, that you could consider morally good. I wouldn't as a libertarian because they're all tax funded, but there's certainly things that we have done that we're not against the Muslim faith or the Muslim world attacking these people, but this isn't cafeteria religion. This is cafeteria foreign policy. These governments these governments prevent our people from establishing the Islamic Sharia using violence and lies to do so. That is hilarious because Sharia law is violence and lies. I mean, Sharia is barbaric. And so you couldn't consider that moral by any stretch of the imagination. But nevertheless, it's not wrong that we've set up puppet governments to stop them from setting up Sharia law. Sure. But again, us is the entire Islamic world, right? And so magically everyone in the entire Islamic world is under the banner of Al-Qaeda, except for the Shias and, except for all of the people that aren't, Two, these governments give us a taste of humiliation and places us in a large prison of fear and subdual. I mean, this is just emotional rhetoric. I don't know what he means by this. I can't really break it down. These governments steal our ummah's wealth and sell them to you at a paltry price. Yeah, I mean, so that's true. Again, IMF kind of situation. We go in, we set up loans, and then, but it's more pernicious than he's actually making it out to be because it's, this is simplistic language. But what's really occurring is, we give these people loans that they have to pay back on interest. And then we allow, like we send over our, we in big quotations here, because it's Western nations. It's not like Western peoples do this as individuals, but it's Western companies that build the bridges and set up the shops and do many of the things. And so, this is also, remember, this is 2002. So some of the successes of later countries like in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and things like that aren't really fully expressed as of yet. I mean, they're big and they're burgeoning, but they're not quite there. But yeah, it's kind of true. These governments have surrendered to the Jews and handed them most of Palestine, acknowledging the existence of their state over the dismembered limbs of their own people, right? So recognize here, every country that is an Islamic country, they would obviously never allow Jews to exist. They would kill and slaughter all the Jews for having dared capture the land from Palestinian people, which many of them homesteaded and is rightfully theirs. Just as much as right to be there as the Palestinians do. But of course, you have this biased, insane terrorist, thought process that, the Jews don't have a right to exist there. And of course, all of these governments, they've done this great evil by trading with people, and doing anything that might bring, trade and prosperity to their people. Instead, what they should be doing is just sacrificing their people to starvation and death and war constantly over and over again to try and kill the Jews. But, what do you expect from a terrorist? The removal of these governments is an obligation upon us and a necessary step to free the Ummah, to make the Sharia the supreme law, and to regain Palestine. And our fight against these governments is not separate from our fight against you, right? I think it's pretty clear, right? Why are you lefty liberal TikTok people reading this and going, wow, this is so based? No, our fight is against you. It's not just against the United States. It's the American people. They want to kill you for the crime of not allowing Sharia law, not allowing women to be subjugated and owned like property, not allowing gays to be stoned to death for the crime of being born gay, not allowing, not allowing special taxes to exist from the whites and from the Christians and from the atheists and from the Jews. If we let you live at all and we don't wipe you from the face of the earth, you will be a people of the book with second-class citizens that are not allowed to own, certain businesses, that have to pay special taxes to the nation state that the Muslims don't have to pay, to ensure that we leech you of your wealth and prosperity and keep you as slaves under the new Islamic empire. Bro, how do you support this? D, you steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of your international influence and military threats. This theft is indeed the biggest theft ever witnessed by mankind in the history of the world. Yeah, I mean, that's just true. And granted, it's true, but it's more complicated, but it's true, right? So like you could take that at face value. We're not stealing the oil, right? What we're doing is we're setting up governments that support us and sell primarily to us, to fund the world and, use the US dollar as like the reserve currency for these things. So that like our dollar can be like this strong thing that influences commerce around the world. And then some of these, these things, these countries are doing that, but it's like the Saudi princes we're not stealing oil from the Saudi princes that are funding Wahhabis and Salafi as terrorist organizations, including you, right? Like you're like Osama bin Laden was funded by Saudi Arabia. We're not stealing oil from Saudi Arabia, right? Like relax. Your forces occupy our countries. True. You spread your military bases throughout them. True. You corrupt our lands. I don't know what the fuck that means. And you besiege our sanctities. Yeah, sometimes. I mean, when wars occur, sure. To protect the security of the Jews and to ensure the continuity of your pillage of our treasures. Yeah, I mean, true. All of this is true. I don't know that some of this is wrong per se, protecting the security of the Jews. I mean, it is in the sense that, like, I don't want a nation state of the United States and I don't want them wasting money in the Middle East. But no more wrong than what they believe in terms of like nation states existing, right? Like I'm not going to put an anarchist lens on our behavior at the behest of Al Qaeda, right? F, you starved the Muslims of Iraq, where children die every day. It is a wonder that more than 1.5 million Iraqi children have died as a result of your sanctions, and you did not show concern. Yet, when 3,000 of your people died, the entire world rises and has not yet sat down. So, this idea that like economic sanctions starve children is like, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's the favorite lie of the commies. That like this is, the sanctions are these massively powerful things that destroy economies in such a degree. Because it wasn't like we were the only fucking trading partner of Iraq. Number one. Number two, it wasn't like Saddam Hussein didn't live in massive opulent palaces. That didn't, fly his sons around on private jets everywhere, to big yacht parties. He lived in opulence and wealth. He starved his people, and was a fascist dictator, that had a horrendous economy. The idea that like American sanctions starved 1.5 million Iraqi children is the same thing as you directly blew up 3,000 people. It's absurd beyond measure. The comparison is ridiculous because, and yet, to be fair, I am against these sanctions, and these sanctions do negatively impact people through, or else they wouldn't work. The problem is that they often impact the people, the children that you see that are starving, more than they do the dictators. But you have no, this is all about how you starved these children and not how a fascistic dictatorship, economically is unviable and starves children. And yeah, the sanctions didn't help. But it's not like it would have been this wonderful, lush economic place with beautiful GDP and freedom and liberalism everywhere under the fascist dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. No, maybe, like, who knows how many children would have starved during that period. He might have just lived better. You've supported the Jews in their idea that Jerusalem is their eternal capital and agreed to move your embassy there. Trump actually did. Right? Yeah, I mean, why not? I don't understand. I guess, I mean, this is a religious crux that, like, our involvement really, like, this isn't a thing about Western foreign policy so much as it is maybe like a bad idea for the West to, agree to do that in some regards. But, this is one I kind of like, I'm kind of iffy on. It's a religious contention. It's not really something that I have much to say on as a libertarian. Should the U.S. foreign policy have done that or not done that is a really complicated question that, like, is just difficult to answer. But it's this idea that this is like this great evil only occurs because these people are radical Muslims. It's actually bad propaganda as far as I'm concerned, because it's just not something that matters to anybody except for extreme radical religious people. And, like, those people are going to have the views they have anyways. With your help, under your protection, the Israelis are planning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Under the protection of your weapons, Sharon entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque to pollute it as a preparation to capture and destroy it. So this is really interesting. The Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque still stands today, in case you're wondering. So the plans in preparation to destroy that region apparently are plans longer than 21 years for whatever reason. When he says that they polluted it and that they're planning to capture and destroy it, what he means is non-Muslims went into this place that we consider sacred because we don't allow Christians and Jews and atheists to enter it, right? So this region is off limits to non-Muslims, unless you're like a very special invited guest. Sometimes every now and then they'll allow like a documentary crew or something like that in that might have people, because if you're gonna do a documentary crew, it's movies. There's probably gonna be Jews, right? Right. But not in the buildings proper. Right. So there's like a greater region and then there's buildings proper. Nobody has been in buildings proper except for police that went in 2014. But this is like 12 years before that. And they like cut speaker wires to, for the Muslim call to prayer, which is super fucked up because it sounds way, way worse than it is, but it's still bad. You shouldn't do it. But also recognize that the call to prayer was a call to action of attacks. And then Israel calls it a compound, which is like offensive, but also might be accurate. So it's a really sensitive area and district, but obviously he's exaggerating and full of shit. So again, this is propaganda to the Muslims. This is not to Americans, because if you ask Americans what Al-Aqsa is, they don't know, right? We don't even know what that is, most of us, unless we're really involved in politics, like somebody like me, right? And so the idea that like people went in and polluted it, he's saying that your very skin, as a non-Muslim, your skin follicles are a pollution to the holiness of God. That's how fucking radical these people are, right? Like it's like you're not, only the Levite can go inside the temple, the tabernacle or whatever, right? It's insane. It's old world shit. But yeah, no, nobody destroyed it. It's still there 21 years later. The Jews did the IDF. Sorry, not the Jews. Sorry, I hate that I do that sometimes. The IDF, they cut some speaker wires to cut the call to prayer one time because they were concerned of, it was a call to action. They had, some type of information that it might. So sorry, let me pause. For anybody that's watching that doesn't know, the call to prayer often is basically when terrorist attacks occur, right? So you have these, the 5 pillars of Islam. You have to pray 5 times a day, right? And so you have these big minarets, and then these minarets will come off often, and so like everything's quiet and everything, and like you're looking, and anyone that's ever been deployed will tell you, not that I have, right? I didn't deploy. I was in the army, but I didn't deploy. But they'll tell you that like when you start hearing like those loud speakers, those You know, like that. That's when the mortars hit. That's when the explosions occur. That's when the suicide bomber drives his bicycle at you and blows himself up to destroy the gate. Right? That is when people die because Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorists want to kill you and martyr themselves. Right? And so that is why they entered. But again, I'm on a tangent because this is like 2014. This is again 12 years after this. But yeah, so IDF has gone into Al-Aqsa a few times over the years, and things have ramped up and escalated lately. So I hope that they do keep the security of that region for people that believe in that silly mysticism. I do hope that nothing untoward does occur. But this idea that like they're coming to destroy Al-Aqsa, and it's like no, they're not. It's absurd. He just means that Jews were allowed to be in a region, and Jews are dirty, disgusting creatures that corrupt the ground they walk on. How dare they step on holy land because they're dirty Jews? That's what he means, right? He's just being nice about it. These tragedies and calamities are only a few examples of your oppression and aggression against us. It is commanded by our religion and intellect that the oppressed have a right to return the aggression. Do not await anything but jihad, resistance, and revenge. Is it in any way rational to expect that after America has attacked us more than half a century, that we will then leave her to live in security and peace? Question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Right? So again, from the crowd of this is what decolonization looks like. These are their justifications for September 11th, for murdering thousands of Americans and for saying that all of you deserve to be murdered, that all of you deserve to be wiped out until the Islamic Caliphate can be established and the entire world can be ruled by Islam, and you all submit, that you cover your women, that your women become property of their husbands with no say, half the say of a man in court, right? That all of you Christians and atheists and Jews, if they let the Jews live, because if Al Qaeda had their way, like there would be no Jews. And of course, the white kids at Princeton University, when they are, recently just chanting, globalize the Intifada, which means, wipe out the Jews in the entire world. You have that. I don't know. Just curious. Don't send your kid to Ivy League colleges, people. They're indoctrinating them to wipe out the Jews. Yeah. So again, this is just a call to action to kill everyone. That revenge and restitution is not an individual crime, but a collective crime. This is collective aggression against a people. We stopped this in World War II. We collectively, hilariously enough. That was the whole point of the Nuremberg trials. Is that there's a point. There's really honestly a big part of World War II. Is recognizing that we don't get to collectivize punishment against people. It's why it's a war crime to put the Jews in fucking camps. Not to be that guy that like invokes the Holocaust during these things. And by that guy also recognize just because my nose is big doesn't mean I'm a Jew. I'm everything but. 3. You may then dispute that all the above does not justify aggression against civilians for crimes they did not commit and offenses in which they did not partake. Right? So here is his call to Americans. It's like, you may think, oh, well, you didn't do it, right? Your government did it. So therefore, it's wrong to kill the little white babies. And then this is his argument as to why it's not wrong to kill all of you, to kill all of us. This is what people are reading on TikTok and going, is this based? Huh? Man. That's like this, like I get it now. Wait, where'd I go? Okay, I'm just highlighting it. I'm just checking where we're at. I'm sorry, I'm going through this so slowly. But there's so many more lies in the beginning half. So like we'll get through the second half a lot quicker. I promise. But we're at the justification. Let me mark this for editing purposes. Okay. So here we go. A. This argument contradicts your continuous repetition that America is the land of freedom and its leaders in this world. I never said that. But it's okay because everything is collective, remember? So you guys said that it's the land of freedom and that its leaders represent the land of freedom. And so it's a contradiction, right? So recognize these people, these terrorists, and maybe that's why the Gen Z has such a hard time understanding why this is so bad, is because that to you, most of you, you are very, very Marxist in your thinking. So you don't understand individualism or the ideas of individual liberty. You don't understand property rights. You don't understand, the Enlightenment philosophies that occurred that pushed us towards, liberal democracies that I would argue need to go far, far further into, anarchistic communities of individual rights and property rights. You don't understand any of those things. You don't even understand individual responsibility and duty and accountability and crimes. You are, most of you, collectivists, socialists. And so these people often use the language of socialism to justify fascism for the entire world, because fascism is an Islamic fascism, right? These are all forms of socialism in many ways. They operate on the same logic, the same things, right? It is the language of collectivism and moral duty and obligation to a collective group of people, right? That whites are responsible for this, or that straight men do this, or that Americans do this, or that Muslims or Jews do this. So it is interesting. Maybe that is why you have a hard time seeing this for the evil that it really is. And I hope that you open your eyes and I hope this is a wake-up call to you, not just to the lies of the media, but to the evils of the very language that you find yourself slipping into, that it is a cult-like slumber, the leftist philosophy of collectivism. It is an abdication of individual rights and responsibility and duties. It is a giving up of the right to fail as an individual, to fail forthrightly in the challenges of life and to make yourself better by those failures, to learn and grow. But continuing on. Therefore, the American people are the ones who chose their government by way of their own free will. I didn't, but again, a majority voted, so therefore the 49% aren't victims magically because they're all part of the same system. A choice which stems from their agreement to its policies. Again, most people didn't support the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Like most people didn't even know that these things were going on, right? So the idea that like, even if we wanted to take this idea that like a collective could be held responsible because 51% agreed, damn the 49%, it was very rarely that 51% of people agreed. It was people that were ignorant to U.S. foreign policy voting on wedge issues, whilst 40 to 60% of the electorate never voted to begin with because they realized that the politicians were all pieces of crap and that there was nothing that they could do to change the system. So it's like the opinions of 60%, most of whom are completely ill-informed and have no idea what's going on, voted representatives that then lied to us and have secrets and all of these other things that we don't even know about to go and commit these acts out into the world. And they're like, you did this. It's like, what collective group of people supported all of this shit in America actively and knowingly? Like, is it even 5% of us? Thus, the American people have chosen, consented to, and affirmed their support for the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, the occupation and usurpation of their land, and its continuous killing, torture, punishment, and expulsion of the Palestinians. Right? This is victim blaming. The American people are victims to U.S. foreign policy just as much as they are victims to the very nation state that imposes its will upon people. We are victims. We are rape victims. Our bank accounts are raped every day as they steal money and they steal property and thus steal our bodily autonomy. And then they give us this idea of freedom by enshrining certain ways in which they won't utilize our bodies and punish us, and yet they violate those all the time. This Constitution of No Authority, the Constitution I never signed, Constitution of No Authority, number 6, Lysander Spooner, definitely worth a read. But the fact that I'm the victim here. I don't support any of this. I support that the Israeli state disbands, and that in its place, covenant communities occur, and that individual property disputes are settled, and that these covenant communities can indeed, probably should, if they're predominantly Jewish, band together and utilize private forces of self-defense against crazy wackos like this person that think that Jews aren't allowed in the Holy Land. That they must be from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is something that is regularly chanted, and most of you don't realize that that's a call for ethnic cleansing and genocide. At best, it's a call to remove and expel every Jew from Palestine, and at worst, it's a call to murder them all. It depends on who's saying it. What the fuck, people? The American people have the ability and choice to refuse the policies of their government and even to change it if they want. We really don't, right? Donald Trump said, was one of the first presidents, one of the few presidents to acknowledge as president since Dwight D. Eisenhower, the prison military industrial complex. Of course, he said the military industrial complex. Dwight D. Eisenhower said the prison military industrial complex. We often forget that, but the military industrial complex is a if you want to use capitalism, right, is the thing. It's not capitalism. It's fascism. It's economic fascism. It's a merger of the corporation and the state. It's not capitalism. But these large companies have massive influence and power. And then there's this fourth branch of the government, the bureaucracy. Donald Trump tried to pull us out of Afghanistan. And what happened? They lied to him. And then they bragged after he was president about lying, about directly violating orders from the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, who was in part elected to stop these wars. They bragged about how they just disobeyed him and waited for Biden to come back before they continue. And then they moved funding from CIA because Donald Trump ordered that the CIA not fund rebel organizations and cause turmoil in the Middle East. And they moved funding and said to the Department of Defense. USS, was it Piccadilly, right? President Biden has been funding billions into Eastern European countries to make weapons that look Russian to then give to terrorists in the hopes that if they catch us, they won't say these are American weapons. His withdrawal from Afghanistan was designed to arm all these terrorists. I mean, yes, the American government feeds off of an oppression of the Islamic people or Islamic state, nation states. Abso-fucking-lutely. And yet this idea that the American people are not equal victims, we're certainly not equal victims in terms of restitution owed to us or in terms of, a utilitarian calculus of how we've suffered under such oppression. But we are just as much victims as they are. We have no capability. Trump couldn't stop it. Trump literally wanted us out of Afghanistan and couldn't do it. His hands were tied. He was impeached twice so that they could stop him from pulling out of Afghanistan, so that they could stop him from, they went at, the most likely person to pull us out of these foreign wars. They tried to get him, they threatened his life, and the FBI threatened to prosecute his son for made up bullshit so that he would turn evidence against Donald Trump to try and get Donald Trump impeached. The FBI staged a coup to overthrow the president of the United States because the president of the United States, a whacked out narcissist that he is, a crazy idiot that got very little done, but got some things done that were positive and some things done that were bad, and who shouldn't be president again because he's already proven himself weak and ineffective. Should be kingmaker instead and should be helping the Republicans, but whatever. This person, the FBI staged a coup and so that it would be impossible for him to appoint new representatives. And that's why he kept around John Bolton. And still, he was able to negotiate peace treaties in the Middle East via Jared Kushner, not state agents, and trade policies and things like that. So no, Osama bin Laden, we don't have the power to control and stop this. And it has never been a majority of Americans that have supported these wars in the Middle East, especially after this. And yet it doesn't matter. Look at what Biden has done. Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan, but he moved back into Somalia. And we moved back into Syria, wink, wink. And we're in a bunch of other North African countries. And we're all over the world in secret missions that we don't know. And we've got 2,000 American bases throughout the world, though it's really only like a couple hundred. The 2,000 number is like forward operating positions of like weapons caches, so we can set up a base instantaneously. Those exist all out the world. And we have like one or two soldiers protecting them, and they like count those as bases. But nevertheless, they're there, right? And of course, what are we doing? We're funding a war against Russia and Ukraine, and we're funding both sides of a war here in Israel-Palestinian conflict to this day, and lying through our teeth about the conflict, and paying and having intelligence agents that were proven to be liars by Edward Snowden that violated millions of Americans' rights, that deserve to be buried under the prison, are getting paid six-figure salaries to work for CNN and show up occasionally. These people, these contacts and go-betweens between the State Department and the media that ensure that the media is propaganda outlets that tell the story that supports Western genocide of Islamic countries, are the ones in power, not us. And yeah, the neocons won't tell you that. But that doesn't make Osama bin Laden based, you psychos. The American people are the ones who pay the taxes, which fund the planes that bomb us in Afghanistan. The tanks that strike and destroy our homes in Palestine. Again, this collectivist garbage language. Al-Qaeda doesn't represent Palestinian people at all. It never did. And certainly not al-Nusra, as they're fucking hoarding grain and starving people in Syria as a means of fighting back against the Bashar al-Assad. You know, the current kind of like continuation of Al-Qaeda. The American people are the ones who pay the taxes, which fund the planes that bomb us in Afghanistan. The tanks that strike and destroy our homes in Palestine. The armies which occupy our lands in the Arabian Gulf, and the fleets which ensure the blockade of Iraq. Yeah, but we didn't choose to pay taxes, dude. It's like, yeah, it's absolutely true that we pay taxes. These tax dollars are given to Israel for it to continue to attack us and penetrate our lands. I mean, ostensibly, tax dollars are gone to like fund the Iron Dome, to fund weapons research. And so like that's defensive tactics so that they're not bombed. And that's like that weapons research is often, you know, like the knocking on the roof things and stuff like that. But I mean, like, it's kind of that same thing when Planned Parenthood is like, oh, we get funding, but funding doesn't go to abortion. It goes to our other services. And it's like, okay, but you get funding and you do abortions. And if you didn't get that funding, you'd have to charge more money for your services somewhere. And therefore, this allows you to open up more clinics by having artificially lowered prices that allow you to do more abortions. So this idea that like we don't fund abortions is absurd. Your tax dollars fund abortions all throughout the country. It's the same thing. It's like, yeah, Israel occasionally commits crimes against people. That's undoubtedly true. And we fund them. And just because those funding is allocated to certain things, this allows them to not have to tax people to fund those certain things, right? So it subsidizes the Israeli economy and government. Then they can go and do these other things, right? If they didn't have this subsidization, you know, maybe they would have to pull money from there to put into their defensive programs in order to maintain the Iron Dome, or in order to maintain, certain weapons research and things like that. So it's kind of bullshit. Okay. So the American people are the ones who fund the attacks against us, and they are the ones who oversee the expenditure of these monies in the way they wish through their elected candidates. Again, this is silly. This is childlike understanding of politics. And of course, you know, he's Western educated, you know, college educated as well. Him and his whole family. And of course, you know, he was funded himself by the American tax dollar to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. So, you know, it's a little hollow coming from him, but also he knows that this is BS. It's all just propaganda. Also, the American army is part of the American people. It is this very same people who are shamelessly helping the Jews fight against us. Again, more hatred for the Jews with little to no nuance, but the Jews are a problem, etc. And then, of course, the American army as part of the American people is such an absurdity. Like, and yes, if an American is over there shooting at you, you have every right to shoot back, right? But like, that's not the same thing as like killing a baby because they're both Americans, right? That's like saying, if I don't know, that's like saying I can go kill Palestinians because Al Qaeda did September 11th. Like, by your logic, we have every right to kill all of you because you're all responsible for September 11th. That makes no sense. The American people are the ones who employ both their men and women in the armed forces which attack us. Again, this is just restating the thing. Duh. This is why the American people cannot be innocent of all crimes committed by the Americans and Jews against us, right? So, because you pay taxes, which you have no choice to do, and you are a victim of the American state, and because you have the ability to vote, even though your vote probably doesn't matter, you only have a choice between two candidates or, a third candidate to like push the political needle, but it's certainly not going to affect the outcome of that person in that election, other than like a protest vote by not voting for your preferred candidate, which you should do, by the way. Vote for the third party, right? Only vote for people that are going to reduce the size and scope of the state. Right. But this idea is like, well, you pay taxes against your will, and then you may or may not participate in an election system that gives you a choice between a turd sandwich and, a pile of crap. I don't know. It's, whatever. And that both of these people would perpetuate these things. And also, you might not even know that they're happening, either because you're ill-informed or because whatever it is that they're doing is deemed top secret, so you're not even allowed to know. Because of that, it's justified to kill you all. It's such a string of BS justifications for killing. But this kind of collectivist nonsense seems to have taken hold of Gen Z, the very same people that think that your whiteness is a privilege that I don't fucking feel, that no white person has ever really fucking felt, except for very maybe limited situations, right? And that you're responsible for reparations because of your white skin. I've had people tell me this, and it's like, dude, I'm 13% black. My great-great-great-grandfather married and freed his slave and married him, then married her, which, I don't know, maybe he didn't free her because he married her, but, that's another thing, right? But was cut off from the family's wealth because of that. Like, my family is Appalachian, and that's my father's side. My mother's side is Appalachian, Scotch-Irish, Sioux Indian, and escaped black slaves and freed blacks out in the mountains of Appalachia, and have never been privileged by these. What was their privilege? Living on the edge of territory and constantly being attacked by Indians, Native Americans? Or was it their privilege later when, when people paid dirt prices for their coal and used them for blue votes for welfare programs that never really trickled down to them? And then once they did trickle down in larger amounts, they destroyed their communities. Was it being a test subject for Oxycontin and creating heroin addicts everywhere in the region, that suicide and death and destruction of families? There's a fun little joke. Here's a prescription I got right here. Actually, it's Excedrin, but whatever. West Virginia mating call from the wonderful whites of West Virginia, right? Was that the privilege we have? Was it the privilege of coal industry evaporating and it destroyed America? It's like, no, dude. But collectively, I'm more white than I am black. I'm white passing, so I have this great privilege, which is, less grants, less government money, less opportunities, but, still pay the same taxes. Collectively, I'm responsible for these things. It's an absurdity. So moving on. F. Allah, the Almighty, legislated the permission and the option to take revenge. Thus, if we are attacked, then we have the right to attack back. Whoever has destroyed our villages and towns, then we have the right to destroy their villages and towns. Whoever has stolen our wealth, then we have the right to destroy their economy. And whoever has killed our civilians, then we have the right to kill theirs. Again, this is an absurd moral argument, right? Some insane lunatic destroys a village, bombs a village and vaporizes it. Thus, the village he's from, they have a right to destroy. It's not about destroying or killing him, the person that did the crime. No, Allah, God Almighty, right, according to him, says that you may murder innocent women and children so long as you feel justified in revenge. There's no logic to this. The whole logic is God said so. And this is one of the many reasons why religions are, a poison on the world. They've given us many things. And I have a certain respect for the evolution of Christianity and what it has done for Western society. But eventually we do have to get rid of it. It is mysticism. It does hold us back. And it is a danger and a threat to the existence of the human race to allow people to engage in, you can be allowed to. Allowed to is not the right word, but that we as a society accept people of the Christian faith, people of Islamic faith or Jewish faith as rational beings. They're irrational people. It is a form of lunacy. Now, here's what you Gen Zers and many of you atheists don't realize is that religion is not just a codified book, set of commandments. It is a way of thinking. And it is, Nietzsche helped discover this, in his Lamentations, the old man in the lantern. I can't remember the exact name of the poem, but you all know God is dead, right? He proclaimed God is dead. There's a rotting carcass of religion that we're kind of hanging on to, the Christian faith in the West, that we kind of utilize as a foundation for our logic because we haven't, instituted appropriate rational thought from, objectivist and Enlightenment philosophy to understand where morality comes from. So we were kind of like sitting on a corpse of Christianity, even you. And then there is a new religion that many of you Gen Zers do not realize. That those of you that think via the dialectic, that think with contradictions that you then bring together towards an idea of to synthesizing an idea, right? That you see the world as these contradictions that need to be married together because everyone has their truth and their subjective values and people's stories and narratives are different. Like this is a religion in and of itself. This Marxian view of the world that you have interpreted via critical theory to take on Antonio Gramsci's kind of countercultural hegemonic fashion, this critical theory for my preferred thing, right? This, queer theory is, an attack on heteronormativity as a logical thought process. You also think religiously. You think much like these Islamic terrorists with your collectivism and your collective punishment. And I can't help but think that that's why this captivates many of these Gen Zers so much. It's because they have no idea that it is, the American conservative and right that thinks more individualistically, certainly not enough, certainly not individualist enough. They are socialists in their own right. But that you have adopted a collectivist religion, unbeknownst to you with a political in-group, that you reinforce with all of these different social things. There's so much cult-like behavior that occurs that it becomes obvious to anyone not in the cult, and you're blind to it when you're in it. Just so many things: the snapping fingers, the point of privilege, the cult doctrine, the words like inclusivity, or diversity is our strength. These become mantras of a religion. It even takes on, its form of expression in clothing and identification. You guys don't identify as like a man or a woman. You identify as he, him, or her, hers, or they, them, or, whatever neo-pronouns you choose. Even though you're not trans in any way, you only do it as a means of identifying like yourself as part of the religious movement. Worse yet, you can hear it in your voices. I don't know if you know this, cult members, Gen Zers that are watching this. You probably didn't make it this far, and that's fine. But we can hear you coming. We hear you because we can hear the California lilt that you picked up in college during your indoctrination. Mm-hmm. right? Like we hear, there doesn't need to be words for us to hear the way that your language is shaped by your religious beliefs and a collectivist ideology that believes in collective punishment and collective rights and responsibilities. So maybe that is why you seem to identify with mad Islamic terrorists that want to rid the world of the gays and the Jews. You don't hate the gays and the Jews, but you're more like them than you realize. And maybe you're starting to realize it. And again, I hope that is another wake-up call to you. It should be, but it probably isn't. That's unfortunate. But again, moving on. The American government and press still refuses to answer the question, why did they attack us in New York and Washington? If Sharon is a man of peace in the eyes of Bush, then we are also men of peace. America does not understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it using the language it understands. Right? America doesn't realize that it's bad until we bomb it. You know, you could have just bombed a military installation, right? You could have bombed an airfield. You could have bombed things that were actually military occupation from people that were actively fighting in some capacity. But the American people are ignorant. They wouldn't know. Bombing an airfield, that would have been a blip in the news. No one would have paid attention. Certainly terrorism gets people to pay attention. It is effective in that. And so, but the problem is that by recognizing that, they would have to recognize that the American people are ignorant to these things, not supportive. It is a contradiction in his own logic, but again, these people are collectivists and religious extremists. They don't need logic. The first thing that we are calling you to is Islam. Of course, obviously, right? So we're going to speed through this. This is just stupid. You know, please, for the love of God, be a Muslim. Insane. Insane. If you are a leftist and you decide, if you are a leftist, recognize that anyone that is a leftist and an Islamist is a Muslim, they are that in and of itself is an insane contradiction. Islam, by its very nature, is anti-progress, anti-liberal, anti-rights, anti-freedom, and is an act of fascist oppression that forces all people to bend to the knee of those in power, and for those that are not Muslims to be second-class citizens, to be slaves. Right? Islam, as the Muslim empires of old, were the largest slave empires that ever existed, not the Americans. And they were around long after the Civil War and the Americans abolished slavery. It was Thomas Jefferson that had to abolish the Barbary pirates' slavery and fight against the Muslim slavers that were doing everything they could to capture white women as slaves, because they were a premium from the blacks that they had enslaved millions and millions of in Africa. The religion of the unification of God, of freedom from associating partners with him, and rejection of this, of complete love of him, the exalted, of complete submission to his laws. That's the important part there. And of the discarding of all the opinions, orders, theories, and religions which contradict with the religion he sent down to his prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we must discard and abolish any and all who dare think differently than Muhammad. Islam is the religion of all the prophets and makes no distinction between them. Peace be upon them all. Just make sure that you recognize that, you don't worship Jesus Christ as anything other than just one prophet who was wrong, that got some things wrong. It is to this religion that we call you, the seal of all the previous religions. It is the religion of unification of God, sincerity, the best of manners, righteousness, mercy, honor, purity, and piety. It is the religion of showing kindness to others. Boy, does Al-Qaeda have a weird way of showing kindness. Establishing justice between them, granting them their rights, and defending the oppressed and the persecuted. It's a religion of oppression and persecution, but nevertheless, it is a religion of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil with the hand, tongue, and heart. It is the religion of jihad and the way of Allah, so that Allah's word and religion reigns supreme. And it is the religion of unity and agreement on the obedience to Allah and total equality between all people without regarding their color, sex, or language. All of this is propagandistic bullcrap. I think I think we all know it. Gen Z, if you need look any further, just look to anywhere in the world where Muslims have ever been in power. And what you will see is rampant oppression and murder of the LGBTs. You will see extreme lack of rights for women. And it is only in those places that are heavily influenced by Western society and liberalism where Muslims in control begin to look like us. Look at Dubai. It's a heavily capitalist place. Now, granted, there is welfare for its citizens, et cetera, redistribution of things, et cetera, right? But it is constantly pleading to American corporations and the capitalist system, and Western liberal values leak into these places and subsume them slowly but surely, right? It was in Dubai that when the soccer tournament was held there, that they agreed that they wouldn't arrest people for being homosexual on the streets. Public displays of affection, kisses, hand holding, anything like that, because it is against the law not to be gay per se, but to do PDA. And the punishment for PDA in a homosexual way can be prison. So don't get caught holding hands in Dubai with another female, or you might go to jail. Females and men, oof, you really better be careful. You might end up accidentally with all of the foreign aid workers that die in mass graves in Dubai, building things as the slaves are brought in to work for next to nothing and do not receive any of the welfare benefits of the local population. But we don't talk about that because Dubai has pretty little casinos and man-made islands. Nevertheless, it is one of the more liberal places in the Muslim world where Islam reigns supreme. It is the religion whose book, the Quran. Oh, shit. I need to tighten this up real quick. Oh, maybe not. I got to tighten it on a different bolt. I'll get to that later. My bad. It is the religion whose book, the Quran, will remain preserved and unchanged after the other divine books and messages have been changed. The Quran is the miracle until the day of judgment. Allah has challenged anyone to bring a book like the Quran or even 10 verses like it. I mean, this is just like, whoa, Islam's so good, so great. Yeah, the Quran's been changed. Don't let them bullshit you. I mean, it's a lot younger, and it is an oral tradition, and it can only be in one language, and it's, it's unchanged, right? But like, dude, the hadith is like, the context of the Quran. And so like, there's so many, like every person is a different hadith, or, the sunnah, that most Muslims at the very least is, the hadith that they do, for the most part attached to. But it has been changed and it has been translated, but it's not the real one if it's translated. Cool. It hasn't gone through a reformation. Sure. Sort of. There have been slight grammatical changes and things like that to the Quran over time. We have found these. This is just a weird fucking like God is amazing and wonderful and it's a miracle that's stepped down because it's God's chosen book. It's stupid. The second thing we call you to do is to stop your oppression, lies, immorality, and debauchery that has spread among you. So here, right? Here we are, Gen Z, okay? New section. Oh, dang it. So, new section here. This is where we show you just how much Al-Qaeda is not on your fucking side, you lunatics. A, we call you to be people of manners, principles, honors, and purity, to reject the immoral acts of fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gambling, and trading with interest. Okay? So, again, no credit cards, no loans, no mortgages. All of these are against the will of Allah. No homosexuality. And no sex other than being a Muslim and being married to a wife and having missionary sex with her for the purposes of breeding and having children. So you better put those condoms away. Better stop that birth control. And you better make sure you don't hold hands with that girl, because if you do, I'm going to stone you and murder you like the degenerate that you are. That's what you think is like, oh, this is opening my eyes. Okay, moving on. We call you to all of this, that you may be freed from that which you have become caught up in, that you may be freed from the deceptive lies that you are a great nation, that your leaders spread amongst you to conceal from you the despicable state to which you have reached. You're an evil nation because, not because of, Western foreign policy, sure. The nation state is evil. Again, I am a libertarian here. And so, it is evil in many regards. But the idea that like homosexuals exist is not making us evil. B, it is saddening to tell you that you are the worst civilization witnessed by the history of mankind. Sure. Yeah. I still think America is one of the greater nations in the world. It certainly has its problems. And if you were to do a consequential analysis where your values were that of, maintaining the sovereignty of other nations, then yeah, we might be one of the worst. But if you were to look at individual rights and liberties that are not granted, but at the very least not taken from us from the debaucherous, disgusting, horrible, evil empire that is the United States government, we are also one of the better ones. And again, there's this idea of worst civilization. It is also an understanding that that is not just talking about the government. That is talking about us as a people and as a society and the fatherland of the United States, if you will. And to say that we are one of the worst civilizations in that regard is absurd, right? We have exported culture. We have exported degeneracy and debauchery, to be sure, but also liberalism and freedom and rights and ideas of individual liberty are things that we have put forward that Islam could never contend with, because Islam is against freedom and liberty. It is about submission and slavery. You are the nation who, rather than ruling by the Sharia of Allah and its constitution and laws, choose to invent your own laws as you will and desire, right? So God made Sharia law, and Sharia law is so based because it's sexist and evil, and many of its pontifications, how it ought to be utilized in the Hadith, are just pure fucking terror, especially in their treatment of Jews. But don't worry, God said it though. So God gave us the good laws. How dare you give people individual liberty? You separate religion from your politics, contradicting the pure nature which affirms absolute authority to the Lord and your Creator. You flee from the embarrassing question posed to you. How is it possible for Allah the Almighty to create His creation, grant them power over all the creatures in land, grant them all the amenities of life, and deny them that which they are most in need of, knowledge of laws which govern their lives? Well, it's real easy if you realize that Allah didn't do that, that's an absurd kind of thing that you immediately assume. But again, the religious scholars of the world are very practiced in their apologia, but not in appropriate rhetoric and good faith arguments. You are the nation that permits usury, which has been forbidden by all the religions. Yet you build your economy and investments on usury. As a result of this, in all its different forms and guises, the Jews have taken control of your economy, through which they have taken control of your media and now control all aspects of your life, making you their servants and achieving their aims at your expense, precisely what Benjamin Franklin warned you against, right? So again, Jews control the media because they're overrepresented, even though it's not even predominantly Jews. They control the banks because they're overrepresented, even though it's not even predominantly Jews that run the banks. And Jews control everything because usury, because Jews are disgusting people that utilize usury, because we made them do that. Like the Christians made them do that. They are the stranger. As you would put it from, what is that sociologist? The Stranger from George Smell. Sorry about the pause. It's worth reading. Articles on The Stranger by George Smell. It's a good look into sociology of fashion too, interestingly enough. But nevertheless, this is an absurd. This is just where the inability of the Muslims to curtail their hatred of Jews leaks forward. There's nothing wrong with usury. I mean, it depends on how you define usury, right? Like some religious texts, the way they defined it as fraudulent or potentially, or intentionally predatory is wrong. But if you're giving a loan on interest, that is what capitalism is. To be against usury is to be against capitalism. And I'm sure Gen Z is going based right now, right? I'm sure the alt-right is like based, right? But you cannot have a market economy because usury must be done either by the nation state or by the capitalist. So you also can't have fascism, and you also can't have low communism. You can't have a nation state. The only way that you could abolish usury is to live in complete anarchism of a leftist variety that would require you to enslave all humans to an equality that is imposed upon them, where they're not allowed to have property, where they're not allowed to achieve or succeed in anything in life. And that nation state cannot build projects because the entire idea of usury is interest on capital investment. And so this is one of the major, one of the three main things that are necessary to produce anything in a market economy or to produce anything really at all. You need land, you need labor, you need capital. So you need land, you need a place to build your factory or, place to build your farm. You need labor, you need humans that are going to work on your farm or your factory. Even if your labor is mostly done by machines, that would then move that into capital. But even still, who watches the machines? Other machines? Eventually, somewhere, there is a human that needs to look at the code. There is a human mechanic that needs to come repair the machines, right? There is some oversight, some labor that is done by humans. Even if that labor is, marketing for the product or some other form of thing in order to produce the product or sell the product or move the product in some capacity. You have humans and labor. And then you have capital. You have investment of monies now, because the thing is that we need to invest in something in order for it to work, right? I can't just wake up tomorrow and go, well, I have a house and I have a bunch of people. I'm going to build cell phones, right? Like, no, I can't just build cell phones from scratch. I have to invest money to build a factory that can build cell phones and to buy materials for cell phones and, to pay people to work on designing my cell phones, et cetera, all upon the assumption that in the future, people will want these cell phones. If I gain no profit, right? And this is usury. This is interest on my own capital investment. If I gain no profit off of it in the future, there are going to be times where I lose money because I guessed incorrectly. I thought people would want 100 cell phones in this town. They only wanted 80. Now I have 20 cell phones and I can't do anything with them. So I've lost 20% of all of my money that I invested and I gained nothing. Therefore, I lose. I can't do this again. I'm out of money. I'm out of business. I cannot produce. Next time I can only produce 80 cell phones or 60 or 50 or 40 or none. Right? So capital investment requires that I gain something in the future for the investment that I made now. And so what that is that's profit. When I sell things, I make a profit. I gain more than the money I put in. And that is my reward for two things. One, the universal time preference, which is to say that people want things now as opposed to later, right? And so what that means is that I'm giving things for the people want something now. Everything's not made to order. They don't go, oh, well, make me a cell phone and I'll get it in 2 months, right? They're willing to pay more and they want it more and it's more effective and better for everyone's life if the moment they want a cell phone, they go to the store and they buy a cell phone. But that means that a capitalist somewhere or a commissar was creating something in a factory somewhere months ahead of time under the assumption that someone would want this product in the future. So that's profit is the reward for that. And the other thing is that this is all a guess. We don't live in a perfect, evenly rotating economy. We have to guess what it is. And sometimes we get those guesses wrong. And the capitalist has the best information to not get those guesses wrong because they have price. So they know how much an engineer costs. And that baked into the price mechanism of how much an engineer costs is all of the engineer education in the world. It's how much engineers are desired. It's, what is the value of an engineer's based upon price in the market. To me, it's just, this is how much an engineer costs. I'm going to get an engineer for my phone. I'm going to get 2 engineers because I want a really good phone, or wow, engineers are really expensive. I'm only going to get one to design the phone and hope it's good. And the reason is because engineers are needed elsewhere. So I can't afford 2 engineers for my product. Or there's too many engineers, and so I can afford a bunch of them, and they're cheap, right? And so it's easy for me currently to make leaps and bounds with little investment in designing and creating new cell phones. So usury, the idea that usury is wrong, only makes sense under a definition that Islam is not using. And it doesn't make any logical economic sense, and it doesn't make any other in any sense in that regard. What they're really talking about in the old times, right? But this is the problem with religion, is that it's anti-reason, and it's ahistorical, because they don't recognize that the will or the word of God is wrong now because it was only right then, and now the things that you're against that you think are wrong don't make sense in the current economy. They didn't actually make sense then. They just made rational sense to the people at the time in their approximation because they had imperfect information. They didn't know about capitalism, right? They didn't know about superior forms. They didn't know about, marginal utility and the marginal revolution hadn't occurred in economic philosophy, etc. And so there's just one example of religious extremism that, like, America is evil because we operate off of a system that is literally required, even when the commissar does it. The commissar has to take resources, okay? And sometimes they make mistakes. And so you could abolish usury from the commissar's perspective, right? There will be no loans, but there will be taxes or profit in some capacity that they've made off of things, resources that they've taken from people that should rightfully own them, but they don't because they're all under the communist dictatorship. And then they'll take those resources and they'll lose resources in trying to acquire information that the capitalist already has, such as price, via research. But even still, they'll lose things by getting things wrong and investing things improperly because they're not really incentivized as well as the capitalists to do so. And then what that requires is that they need to take more money to compensate for the money that they lost. And this is the exact same process as someone giving you a loan and charging interest. They charge interest because you want the money now for your project now, and you're going to make a profit on it later. Therefore, the interest is worth it because as you make your profit is expected to exceed the interest on the loan. You make a profit, they make a profit. They also charge interest because some people don't pay their loans back. Some people go bankrupt. Some people go out of business and they can't pay their money back. And so they have to charge interest, or they can't keep loaning out money, or they just go out of business. They don't have any money left. It's stupid. And then, of course, this all becomes a justification for hating the Jews. It's insane. The Jews run the media. The Jews run everything because of the usury. Yeah, well, unfortunately, Jews understand economics in a way that most people don't. You're a nation that permits the production, trading, and usage of intoxicants. You also permit drugs and only forbid the trade of them, even though your nation is the largest consumer of them. Again, individual rights and liberties. This is against liberty. This is against individual freedom. But there are so many things with the pharmaceutical industry, and ways in which we have done these things. And absolutely, the war on drugs is a complete and dismal failure. What he doesn't mention is that Qaeda was in part and largely funded by selling opium. And by using that as a cash crop. That the two biggest cash crops in Afghanistan, and also for the warlords that funded and helped gave money to Al Qaeda, separating out the big oil companies that were supposedly stealing all the oil from, right? Saudi Arabia funding them, so they're getting oil money that they say is all our fault and they're terrible, but they're also getting funded by hashish and opium. And the opium was being funneled into Europe and was a big part of the drug trade of heroin, as well as the pharmaceutical industry's production of Oxycontin and drugs like that are destructive to people's lives. And the hashish and hash and things like that was another big product. So the biggest cash crops and the way that they got their money is oil and drugs. And it's like you degenerates. It's like you're the one fucking funding it. The hypocrisy of these people is astounding. You are a nation that permits acts of, and of course, just for the record, altered states of consciousness is individual freedom and liberty. The idea that we can stop people from taking drugs is tyrannical in nature, and it is one of the many horrors of Islam. Is the tyranny of, they would continue the failed war on drugs to a worse degree, and would see much the same results with more horrific punishments. You are a nation that acts of immorality, and you consider them to be pillars of personal freedom. You have continued to sink down this abyss from level to level until incest has spread amongst you, in the face of which neither of you your sense of honor nor laws object. The Muslim world has a much larger problem with incest than anywhere in the Western world. It is kind of hilarious that they're calling out incest when it is the Islamic faith that allows for incest and is pro-incest for second cousins. And even for first cousins, though first cousins tend to be frowned upon in most of the Muslim world because they have some fucking sense. So there's that. Just throwing that out there. Who can forget your President Clinton's immoral acts committed in the official Oval Office? After that, you did not even bring him to account, other than that he made a mistake, after which everything passed with no punishment. Is there any worse kind of event for which your name will go down in history and be remembered by nations? America's done a lot of things that are worse than President Clinton getting a blowjob in the Oval Office. Like, I don't know, Andrew Jackson making the Native Americans walk the Trail of Tears. Or, I don't know, President Lincoln, in the Civil War, refusing prisoners of war in the hopes that them starving to death and dying of disease would be a burden on the Confederacy having to try to feed and take care of them. Or President Clinton murdering 1 million black slaves that he kept slaves. They just lived in the contraband camps, and no one wants to talk about President Clinton being the largest slaver in all of world history as leader of an official owner of the contraband camps that murdered 1 million blacks. And while we're at it, the Confederacy and slavery in the South in general, like just slavery and that, all of these things are way worse and so many more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Way worse than freaking getting a BJ in the Oval Office, you fucking psycho. Is it bad? Yeah. Should that guy be our leader? I assure you, we don't need a leader. We do not need an American president. We do not need an American government. It is an absurd thing an absurd tradition we're passing on. You are a nation that permits gambling in all its forms. The companies practice this as well, resulting in the investments becoming active and the criminals becoming rich. It's only criminals because you believe gambling to be illegal. There's nothing inherently wrong with gambling, but gambling addictions can be a problem. And there are certain ways in which they psychologically trick people into engaging in things and, loot crates and stuff like that, which didn't really exist at the time of his writing here. So, I kind of get it. Gambling can be a problem, but, people are free to make mistakes. That is more important than being forced to submit into being moral agents. You cannot be a good person and a Muslim because believing in Islam is evil, but also you cannot be a good person and Muslim in a Muslim caliphate because you're not allowed to be evil. You're not allowed to be bad in any capacity, at least by their definition. Obviously, you are evil for being a Muslim. But you cannot be a good person and a Muslim under a Muslim caliphate because you can't fail. You just get stoned to death or some shit, right? So you're living in constant terror and fear of making a mistake. You know what I mean? It's like, if gambling's not available, you can't gamble, can you? Okay. You're a nation that exploits women like consumer products or advertising tools, calling upon customers to purchase them. You use women to serve passengers, visitors, and strangers to increase your profit margins. You then rant that you support the liberation of women. I understand this from a Muslim perspective, from a conservative perspective. The problem with this is that the Muslim world does this too. They absolutely use women as sex objects constantly, but of course the more conservative, world that he would want, but he's pointing out America and why America's evil. He's not talking about, the eye and, the thing in his eye. I can't remember the name, the stick in his eye. But regardless of that, Al-Qaeda was funded and, during this time by sex trafficking children that you captured. Right? I mean, like there's plenty of stories of this. Plenty of evidence that you were a large maker in the sex trafficking industry of children. And so this idea that you letting women be on magazine covers and selling their bodies freely, or that being waitresses at Hooters is like this great degeneracy that is a big problem of the West, whilst you actively sell children into sex slavery to fund bombing innocent people that you claim aren't innocent because they pay taxes against their will, and that they vote, of which the record of their vote wouldn't change, and they probably don't even know could change the outcomes of said things, is the ultimate height of hypocrisy. And at the same time, I do think that, the over-sexualization of women, I'm a bit conservative in this regard, that it is something that has been detrimental to women and detrimental to families and detrimental to Western society. I would consider it not necessarily evil is a harsh word. I would say it is evil. But at that point, smoking is evil, right? If I use it in an either or situation here from a perspective, I would say that it is, that it has some good and it has some bad, and that it comes down to an individual choice. But overall, I would say the approximation of it has been less good than it has been negative, if you will. So I take his point here. It's just hard to take seriously Osama bin Laden, a terrorist that murders people, that, gets money from Western governments and gets oil money and gets hash money and gets opium money and, sells children into the sex slave trade, and utilizes them as seriously as some moral arbiter about how women in magazines and girls working at Hooters are a problem. You are a nation that practices the trade of sex in all its forms, directly and indirectly. Giant corporations and establishments are established on this under the name of art, entertainment, tourism, and freedom, and other deceptive names you attribute to it. Yeah. So again, same argument as before, right? It's a repetition, right? Stop, stop selling children into sex slaves, and maybe people would take you seriously on this. But they didn't. He didn't, and he died like a dog. And he deserved it. But again, this is your hero, lefties, TikTok kids. This is your hero. Sex work is real work. Meanwhile, this guy is saying, he's the most sex negative feminist, right? He's as sex negative a feminist as you can be, and a fascist. He wants you all forcibly owned by men, having no say in your lives, to be uneducated except in womanly ways to please your husband as property. And the idea that you garner pleasure from any experience other than that of being a homemaker and a caretaker of multiple children is immoral. And if you talk about it too much, we might stone you to death so that he can get an upgraded younger woman. That's your hero? All right. And because of all this, you have been described in history as a nation that spreads diseases that were unknown to man in the past. Go ahead and boast to the nations of man that you brought them AIDS as a satanic American invention. Woo! Man, that is like a blast from the past of black people's conspiracy theories that the government made AIDS to infect the blacks. No, it's not true. It came from Africa, almost certainly from, digesting and eating, all kinds of jungle animals. That then eventually got zoonotic viruses. To be fair, there is some problems with the way that AIDS is recorded and measured, because you have to understand we're talking about HIV. HIV is very hard to test for and isolate. So that the way that it's largely been studied, especially in the past, has been racist and classist and whatnot. Because it studied AIDS based off a congruence of factors that were basically health. And so it was an AIDS epidemic of gays and blacks, partly because those people were more sexually promiscuous on average. And so it spread there more often. But the way that it was the way that you define AIDS is by symptomology, not by parts per million of a virus. And so because of this, those that were poor, those that had lack of access to certain medical facilities, those that didn't take care of themselves, those that had a poor diet, those that were on drugs, these people had AIDS where they might have the same parts per million of HIV that like a white suburban mom might be HIV positive or not even counted in things, right? So there are some things there, but the idea that like we manufactured AIDS and spread it to the world and bragged about it is insane. You have destroyed nature with your industrial waste and gases more than any other nation in history. Despite this, you refuse to sign the Kyoto Agreement so that you can secure the profit of your greedy companies and industries. Again, America doesn't even touch the pollution of China and India, and they didn't at the time then. This is just trying to do it. Like, I think if America was carbon neutral, right, which is to say the entire country put out no carbon, right? By 2050, this would not reach 0.1% difference in 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius, change in temperature. Like the overwhelming majority of pollution and everything is from China and India, and then of course increasingly developing nations as they develop and burn coal and gas to develop, they create pollution. And so it is a red herring, you know. If we wanted to actually do something, I do agree that, you know, pollution is a problem. I do agree that, you know, I, like many libertarians, you might be surprised, do believe in some form of climate change. I think it's mostly a natural phenomenon, but I do think that we worsen it. And you do not make it better by destroying economies and by shutting down roadway systems and by stifling innovation and development. What you do is you move forward and you look for solutions. You know what I mean? There's this wonderful video I saw where China research firm is developing this new product, this new material, synthetic material that is really slippery, but it's like retarded slippery. And so what it would allow you to do is if toilets were made of this material in the inner lining, you could use something like 60, 70% less water to flush a toilet. Like these are the kinds of things that require a robust economy in order to develop. Carbon capture. We need to move into nuclear, things like that. Signing on to the Kyoto Agreement, which is just a means of force-feeding legislation to destroy our ability to engage meaningfully in an economy and weaken ourselves and not be able to innovate the very technologies that will save our planet, is both stupid and a browbeating by activist organizations that he's latching onto. So there's that. Your law is the law of the rich and wealthy people who hold sway in their political parties and fund their election campaigns with their grifts. Behind them stand the Jews who control your policies, media, and economy. Again, does AIPAC have a lot of influence? Absolutely. Does AIPAC engage in trying to get progressives that are anti-Israel removed, from primarying? Do they just try and primary them? Right? Absolutely, that occurs. Now, do they support Zionists? Absolutely. They're one of many extremely powerful lobbying organizations of the rich and the wealthy that have influence and sway in our political process. There is a wonderful contradiction that exists with Citizens United and this idea that like corporations are people and that people have a right to spend money to influence elections, because it's kind of based upon this idea that is absurd because, well, we don't have a right to for those people to rule over us anyways. For majority rule, this idea that majority rule is somehow righteous, that 51% can bully the 49 is righteous. But it's wrong that a corporation that has money utilizes that money as a means of gaining control of the political process and their power. And yet there is something more pernicious and wrong about the mergers of these corporate interests and these big moneyed interests and the nation state that circumnavigates the will of the people. I do understand that the will of the people should be in some ways more influential than the will of large corporations. And yet, again, there is a kind of meritocratic system here built into the gaining of wealth to a certain degree that makes it more valuable than the one man, one vote system. The real problem is that democracy in and of itself is illegitimate and evil. And so in a system that subverts that can be evil and it can be good based upon the individual basis of why it is subverting it. Democracy does many things that are evil. And so if I am utilizing my money and power to fight the evil things that the democratic power or the government is doing, then I'm not really evil, am I? Right? If I'm spending money, for example, to fund politicians that will not bomb the Middle East, I'm not an evil lobbyist corporation, land of the rich that rule over the will of the people, right? I'm trying to stop the very thing you're trying to stop, right? Supposedly. Which obviously he doesn't care. You know, he's a rich trust fund kid that has been a leech off of sex abuse and murder and terrorism and the sale of drugs and the money from big oil money. His entire life that he lived. So he never cared. But he was good at selling that he cared. But yeah, this idea that the Jews control us because AIPAC has influence over our elections, and that because they're overrepresented by their population in media and in banks is absurd, because they don't even make a majority of either of those things. You have to go to like niche areas of those things in order for Jews to be a majority of people in that area. But they have more power that is ill-defined, et cetera, et cetera. Again, conspiracy theories. Okay. Yes. Are they overrepresented? Yes. Will you get blackballed by the industry if you become anti-Semitic? Yes. Also get blackballed by the industry if you're not communist. Okay. But these things are true. Okay. And because of that, are there not individual Jews that work off of a system of nepotism where they're able to infiltrate and gain jobs despite the fact that they might not be the best qualified person within those jobs, within those positions? Yes. This happens in any area of any race or ethnicity or in-group, right? Look at low-level government jobs at the DMV. It's easier to get a job there as a black person. It just is, because there's a majority of the people working there are black. And because the majority of the people that are working there are black, when they try to get their cousin that might not be the best candidate to be seen in the stack of things and they name drop, right? The other person goes, "Oh, you got a cousin? Oh, maybe I'll check him out." And then they grab him and they go, "Oh, he seems all right." Even though there are more qualified people for that position, there might be a different race or ethnicity. The nepotism of an overrepresentation of a group of people can cause less qualified people to be dominant in an area, right? This is an in-group preference situation where the in-group preference has a value to those within that same in-group of communication, ease of work, common cultural beliefs, etc., that outweighs the value of a slightly better employee. So this happens within Hollywood. It happens everywhere. But the Jews don't freaking control the media just because a couple of incompetent cousins get a job and they're overrepresented because these are the places that they were forced to historically or that they ran to from oppression. Oh, and by the way, they happen to have really high IQs. Like, stop. It's so silly. I know I'm reacting to a dead man's article from 2002, but nevertheless. This is your hero, guys? The guy just hates Jews, says they run everything. Are you fans? Are you big fans of Kanye West and the Groypers now? That's what you are signaled out for in the history of mankind. Is that you have forced? God dang! That which you are singled out for in the history of mankind is that you have used your force to destroy mankind more than any other nation in history. Not to defend principles and values, but to hasten to secure your interests and profits. You who dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan, even though Japan was ready to negotiate an end to the war. How many acts of oppression, tyranny, and justice have you carried out? Oh, callers to freedom. Yeah, I mean, he's exactly right here. He's 100%. Right? When there was the second bomb, surely we didn't need to do. Right? I mean, Nagasaki and Hiroshima was literally just us playing with cool toys and we murdered millions. Millions, especially once you consider, fallout and radiation. But, fucking... Is September 11th worse than Nagasaki or Hiroshima? I don't know that you could really put the two together. Like we did give some warnings, some slight warnings for evacuation. There's that. We were ostensibly at war with them, but Al-Qaeda is at war with us, even if we never declared the war. We killed a lot more people than they did on that day. But this idea that two wrongs make a right is absurd. This is, again, the evil of consequentialism. Is this idea that something is more evil, therefore other evils are allowed to stop the more evil thing because the ends justify the means in some mathematical calculus in your head, is in and of itself evil. Evil is evil. And you don't get to commit more evil as a means of fighting back revenge against a collective that you've deemed responsible. You've destroyed individual liberty and gone out of the realm of morality into this new realm of collective punishment and revenge as a means of calling something justified because two wrongs make a right magically. This is kindergarten ethics, or at least it should be. But this is what happens when you become a collectivist. This morality system. Let us not forget one of your major characteristics, your duality in both manners and values, your hypocrisy in manners and principles. All manners, principles, and values have two scales, one for you and one for the others. This is true of any government. This is a silly kind of thing. Like you could apply this logic to any nation state. You could do the same thing with Iran. You could do the same thing with Afghanistan, Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Like this idea that like America is unique in this. It's like, no, this is just what nation states do, right? The freedom and democracy that you call to is for yourselves and for white race only. As for the rest of the world, you impose upon them your monstrous destructive policies and governments, which you call the American friends, yet you prevent them from establishing democracies. When the Islamic Party in Algeria wanted to practice democracy and they won the election, you unleashed your agents in the Algerian army onto them and to attack them with tanks and guns, to imprison them and torture them, a new lesson for the American book of democracy. I mean, you're exactly right, but democracy isn't really the right word because you're talking about people that willingly voted for communism. Communism will very shortly abolish all democratic systems. So it's not really against democracy, though it is against the democratic will of the people at that time. Personally, as a libertarian, I don't give a fuck about the democratic will of people, especially, I think, voting for, liberation movements and things like that kind of shows that you are kind of against that to begin with, or not against it, I should say, against, you're against real liberation, but that you're voting per se against your interests. This is something that happens all the time in democracies. People are stupid and panicky, and yet at an individual level, they make rational decisions. And so when you have this collectivist mindset, you see the irrationality of man made manifest by this collective things, because they're in areas that they don't understand. Not everyone is an expert on foreign policy, but people shouldn't be involved in understanding or judging foreign policy unless they're an expert in it, or unless it has some role to play in their lives. What they should be an expert in is the non-aggression principle. They should be an expert in not doing those things. So, of course, yes, the American involvement in funding terrorist organizations and throughout the entire Middle Eastern world is no secret. It was, however, to many people at this time when this letter came out, trying to understand, many Americans had no idea that we were funding terrorism throughout the entire world, or that we still do, that Biden is a war criminal, and that Biden funds terrorism and funds wars with stolen taxpayer dollar to this day. And brags about it. Policy on prohibiting and forcibly removing weapons of mass destruction to ensure world peace. It only applies to those countries which you do not permit to possess such weapons. As for the countries you consent to, such as Israel, then they are allowed to keep and use such weapons to defend their security. Anyone else who you suspect might be manufacturing or keeping these kinds of weapons, you call them criminals and you take military action against them. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of true. It's kind of, like, again, this is an overly simplistic worldview, of which he's very educated on and knows how to spin a narrative to trick little Gen Z kids, right? Who didn't exist at the time, really, but you get it. Or at least most of you didn't. There's only a couple of you who were like little babies at the time. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of true. There is a hypocrisy to allowing, Israel or America or Pakistan, which is a Muslim country, that we allow to have weapons of mass destruction. We're not invading Pakistan anytime. But yeah, do we do it to our enemies? Do we try and stop our enemies like Iran from having weapons of mass destruction because they're large sponsors of state terrorism, because we know they would have given them to people like you, and we know that you would have bombed all of New York City if you could have, because you're an insane, diabolical murderer. At least you were before we killed your ass. Hopefully we did. Sea burial from the Navy SEALs is a little sus to me, but whatever. Yes, I mean, this is kind of true, but it's a much more, nuclear proliferation is a much more complicated issue, and obviously nation states. I don't think any nation state should be should be trusted with nukes, but that is what it is. You're the last ones to respect the resolutions and policies of international law. Yet you claim to want to selectively punish anyone else who does the same. Israel has for more than 50 years been pushing UN resolutions and rules against the wall with the full support of America. Against the wall. I don't know. I guess that's a euphemism. Maybe I don't understand what he's referring to here. But yeah, America vetoes, resolutions against Israel and condemnations all the time, sitting on the Security Council. But it's kind of like it's kind of like a lot of times everybody knows America will do that. And so a lot of other countries that would support it, will kind of do the exact opposite because they know that America will veto it. So it's all cool. Even though they might get in trouble if they supported it and it actually passed, some condemnation or whatever. So it kind of allows many other countries to play both sides of the game. But yeah, I mean, that's fine. I understand that, right? 2002 was still 2 years before Israel abolished using human shields, right? So he kind of has a point here. They were still using human shields as part of IDF policy in 2002, which is wild. Of course, terrorists in the Muslim world, and in Palestine were doing the same thing, but nevertheless. As for the war criminals which you censure and form criminal courts for, you shamelessly ask that your own are granted immunity. However, history will not forget the war crimes that you committed against the Muslims and the rest of the world. Those you have killed in Japan, Afghanistan, Somalia, Lebanon, and Iraq. Lebanon is hilarious when it is the Palestinians that created a civil war to displace 1 million Christians and murdered a bunch of people. But because some of those people that started a war to kill all the Christians and Jews got killed in that war they started, we're war criminals for not even being in that war, but sending relief funds that were utilized in some ways in that war. That is wild to me. And the Japan thing too, it's yeah, sure, but let's not bring up Japan Unit, 731. You know what I mean? It's not like Japan were the good guys, these innocent victims. Afghanistan is even more hilarious that he finally brings it up now than everything else here. Because in Afghanistan is where we funded you. Well, not you because he's dead, but where we gave money to him and his family so that they could fight the Russians, so that they could stop an invading force that wanted to take over their country and establish communism. And then we left. If you guys doubt me, there's a great film, there's a better book, but film, Charlie Wilson's War, check it out. And the big thing that Charlie Wilson wanted despite, him kind of creating a system that, that Osama bin Laden supported and loved at the time. But once it was used to, to topple other regimes that were Shia or against him in certain ways, all of a sudden he didn't like it. Because, he's a hypocrite here as well. I just think this is so funny. The war crimes he committed. You mean that you did with your guns that we gave you money for? It's crazy. But yeah, Charlie Wilson's war, he set this up. But the worst thing that, the thing he wanted to do on top of that was like nation building and well building for profit. And we didn't do that. And so that's kind of one of the biggest mistakes we made in that foreign policy blunder. I mean, we shouldn't have gone in the first place, but nevertheless. It will suffice to remind you of your latest war crimes in Afghanistan, which densely populated innocent civilian villages were destroyed. Bombs were dropped on mosques, causing the roof of the mosques to come crashing down on the heads of the Muslims praying inside. Again, Islamic terrorists love to do this shit all the time. Get in a mosque, shoot buildings from it, and then they go, you destroyed our villages and everything. It's like, we bombed the place you were bombing from. Where you gathered human shields so that you could then do that because you consider all Muslims to be able to be martyrs in the cause of, and so you're willing to sacrifice and kill your own people, if not sell them into sex slavery. It's like it's Al Qaeda that murdered these people. Actually, I don't think this is Al Qaeda. I think it was a different organization, but nevertheless. But yeah, no, I mean, like the original drone strikes and bombings that we were doing in Afghanistan in like the early 2000s, rough. A lot of civilian casualties, and he's not wrong here. Like we were very irresponsible in the way that we did these, and irresponsible is such a soft word for murdering innocent people. So he is correct, but it's not like we're just running around bombing things randomly. It's just we're being incredibly irresponsible in the way that we bomb things in places we have no business being, trying to stop this war on terrorism. Stop the terrorists, so we don't have to fight them over here, which is all murderous lies and bullshit. But it's not like you're innocent in this when you crowd people into mosques and then use those as bases so that you can then claim martyrdom. You are the ones who broke the agreement with the Mujahideen when they left Kunduz, bombing them in Janggi Fort and killing more than 1,000 of your prisoners through suffocation and thirst. I mean, as if the Mujahideen was like innocent. But yeah. Fair enough. Allah alone knows how many people have died by torture at the hands of you and your agents. Your plans remain in the Afghan skies, looking for anyone who remotely suspicious. Yeah, so this is interesting because this is before Guantanamo Bay leaks and WikiLeaks. Back when the left used to like Julian Assange because he fought powers that weren't leftist. Once he went after Hillary Clinton, all of a sudden he was a horrible monster and all you guys wanted to consider him a traitor. But when he was reporting the war crimes that Americans were committing in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Guantanamo Bay and Cuba, he was the hero of the left, rightly so, because we were and still are torturing people. To this day, the black site in Chicago has not been shut down, where we take gang members or suspected whatever people and we take them from police precincts into black sites in Chicago and torture and beat them for information and then let them out and, none the wiser. Most people don't know about that. And so there's black sites all throughout the world where we're torturing people for information. And torture doesn't work. It doesn't. It doesn't. People like research study after research study after research study has shown that torture doesn't work. Fear can work and torture can instill fear, but like torture very quickly turns into, oh, this is 2002. This might have been after the Guantanamo Bay leaks. I apologize. I'm seeing it ahead. I didn't realize that was timeline was a little off. Whatever. Nevertheless, but yeah, torture kind of works a little bit for a small period of time. You have to be very careful with it. Well, obviously it's wrong under most circumstances, unless, someone is provably like a terrorist that has personally acted in bombing people, then you might be justified in some regard in torturing them for information. Well, the problem is you just don't get good information out of it. Very quickly, when people break from torture, they'll tell you whatever they think you want to hear to stop the torture. And if people aren't broken by torture, then they won't tell you anything. right? So it's like there's a very, very small window or way that you can make torture work. And the things that we did in Guantanamo Bay were, I mean, they were human atrocities of the greatest proportion. I mean, we locked people in boxes where they were in a fetal position and then poured bugs into the boxes and left them in solitary and cramped conditions in boxes for hours on end, being slowly bitten and eaten by locusts, and then pulled them out. And we called these enhanced interrogation techniques, and that they weren't torture, so it's okay. And we did this to people that hadn't been convicted of any crimes, right? And I am using we loosely here because, collectivist nonsense, but, I feel obligated to mention again. But yeah, it was libertarians that were, the most against this at the time, and the left that was against this at the time. And it is interesting to see the left repick these things up. But again, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. The idea that this torture for unconvicted people is wrong does not magically make the pro-torture, pro-slaver, pro-child, known child sex trafficker, known drug trafficker, known I get money from big oil and have gotten money from the American government terrorist that bombs and murders innocent people somehow based or right. What we call you to do thirdly, the third one. What we call you to do thirdly is to take an honest stance with yourselves, and I doubt you will do so, to discover that you are a nation without principles or manners, and that the values and principles to which you are something which you merely demand from others, not that which you must adhere to. Yeah, so he's 100% right, but this is true of any nation state. Nations don't have morals and principles, people do. And there may be some principled people within governments, but they're few and far between. And this is not true. This is not any more true of the United States than anywhere else. But the values of our nation, of our nation's people, do create a kind of bulwark against the worst abuses of the fascistic system that we have in the United States. One that is slowly eroding, I recognize, but one that is still far superior to most other countries. We also advise you to stop supporting Israel. Of course you do. I'd be fine with that financially, but morally not so much. And to end your support of Indians in Kashmir, we have the Russians against the Chechens, and to also cease supporting the Manila government against the Muslims in southern Philippines. That's hilarious. I mean, the Philippines, fascistic, sure, but the Muslims in the southern Philippines were where ISIS was bred. There was terrorist attacks there all the time. But I digress. No, fuck off. We also advise you to pack your luggage and get out of our lands. We desire for your goodness, guidance, and righteousness, so do not force us to send you back as cargo in coffins. It's an interesting, it's a kind of a funny, over-the-top way of putting it, in a very macabre and fucked up way. But yeah, I mean, I think most soldiers that are deployed that I've met, they come back one of two ways. Setting aside the mental health issues and physical injuries aside, come back one of two ways. Either they come back very gung-ho and kind of further indoctrinated into a neocon belief that everything they did was for the greater good, or they come back a libertarian that hates it all. I mean, I think most people see pure evil in many of the things that have occurred that they have done in that world. So, yeah. And it was right for him to say that. It was right for him to say to, not to Jews living in Israel, right? But to the soldiers that are there. Leave. And to civilian contractors and stuff that are there, leave. You know what I mean? Why stay in a place where so many people want to kill you? I mean, they have every right to be, to be working there. The civilian contractors, they have a right to live in any place that they homestead or pay for. Private property rights still exist. But why would you? I would leave. I kind of feel this way about Israel, to be honest. As much as they have every right to exist, and that is their land, and they deserve that justice, Well, individual property owners deserve, from those that inherited property that they've homesteaded. I agree that they deserve that. But like, they all want you dead. I'm not a Jew, so maybe I just don't get it. But like, to me, it's just like, they want you dead. Like, you should just leave. Like, logically speaking, you should. I'm not saying that you should morally. And if you want to fight, that is your right to do so. For land that, you inherited, that is your right. But yeah, I wouldn't suggest it. Sixthly, we call upon you to end your support of the corrupt leaders in our countries. Do not interfere in our politics and method of education. Leave us alone, or else expect us in New York and Washington. I get it. Leave us alone or we'll kill you. Dude, who in the world was supporting Saddam Hussein over here? Anybody? We toppled him. Right? Like no one was supporting, Muammar Gaddafi, right? Like no one supported these people. The best support we got for these people was, well, they already exist, so like we should just leave them alone and not be further involved, because more involvement might make this a problem. That was the only, like we wanted no more intervention. That's what most U.S. people wanted. We were anti-interventionists after September 11th and in between these times. People didn't want this war. Not really. Not people that cared and knew. Your average day American was, in the early days, was certainly swept up by the fervor of, Levi jeans commercials. What would you do? They attacked America. Are you going to let them get away? You know what I mean? Like, sure, there was propaganda that was so heavy that got the dummies on board for a while there. But nobody knew what was going on or had any understanding. Anybody that knew anything about the conflict of the region or anything, that had any actual knowledge of the situation, most of us didn't want to be involved there and didn't want to fight, with the exception of the leftovers of the neocons. And again, this is not us. This is not we. We'll murder you all if you don't do something about these people that you have just as much power as we have to do something about. There's an insane, murderous psychopath who engaged in sex slavery of children, who murdered thousands upon thousands of his own people, as well as Americans that were innocent, that received American funding and training, that was a spoiled rich kid from a rich family that wanted to go play war because it was cool to be a charismatic leader in the fight for freedom. It was an implant, an American implant. The very people he's talking about is him. Western educated. But go off, King. We also call you to deal with us and interact with us on the basis of mutual interests and benefits, rather than the policies of subdual, theft, and occupation, and not to continue your policy of supporting the Jews, because this will result in more disasters for you. Respect us in a way that we don't respect the rights of anyone else and the Jews after we bombed you is so hilarious, but is what it is. So we have some wonderful verses of the Quran. And by wonderful, I mean disgusting from a disgusting book. If you fail to respond to all these conditions, then prepare for fight with the Islamic nation, the nation of monotheism that puts complete trust on Allah and fears none other than him. The nation which is addressed by its Quran with the words, "Do you fear them? Allah has more right that you should fear him if you are believers. Fight against them so that Allah will punish them by your hands and disgrace them and give you victory over them and heal the breasts of believing people and remove the anger of their believers' hearts. Allah accepts the repentance of whom he wills. Allah is all-knowing, Allah wise." I mean, sure, again, I'm against Islam, but that doesn't make me, uniquely pro-Christian or Jew. You know what I mean? And, what is the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. This isn't something that is unique to Islam. It's also a core tenet of Judaism and Christian. Well, I wouldn't say a core tenet. It's a part of Judges, right? So it is a concept that is, important. I wouldn't say it's a core tenet in the way that it is in Islam, but yeah, cool. A bunch of crazy religious radicals that, want to murder everybody, that, want to murder as many people as they can until they're in complete control of the world, and want to take away rights and liberty from everybody. Cool. The nation of honor and respect. But, again, you just stop supporting the Jews or we'll kill you all. Got it. This is your new hero, guys. The nation of honor and respect. But honor, power, and glory belong to Allah and to his messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, and to the believers. So do not become weak against your enemy, nor be sad, and you will be superior in victory if you are indeed true believers. More, God will protect us, rhetoric, bullcrap. The nation of martyrdom, the nation that desires death more than you desire life. Again, these are the people you're dealing with. We wish to be martyred and died. We wish to die in service of Allah, blowing ourselves up and, running into planes, etc., more than you wish to be alive. Cool. This is your religion. This is your people of peace. We wish to kill you all and kill ourselves. It's a death cult. So is environmentalism, but nowhere near to the same degree that this is. It's a death cult. At least Islam and Judaism Islam and Christianity, God dang it, Christianity and Judaism, at least they're pro-life. Jesus Christ. Again, think not of those who are killed in the way of Allah as dead. Nay, they are alive with their Lord, and they are being provided for. They rejoice in what Allah has bestowed upon them from his bounty, and rejoice for the sake of those who have not yet joined them, but are left behind, not yet martyred, that on them no fear shall come, nor shall they grieve. They rejoice in a grace and a bounty from Allah, and that Allah will waste the reward of the believers. Will not waste the reward of the believers. Again, more insane religious rhetoric. There's not really much to say about that. It's a death cult. He's telling you they're a death cult. That we have no fear, and that we have he wants the American public to be afraid, to look under every couch. And why would he want that fear? Why would he want that? That's the real important thing you have to ask yourself. What's the importance of that fear of terrorism here? It's not for peace, right? It's not to grant peace to the world, to stop the fighting. That's not what fear does. He's educated and worldly enough to know what fear does. Fear causes war. Irrationality that leads people to want to protect themselves. And the best way to protect themselves, or, as Napoleon said, the best defense is a good offense. We're going to have a war on terrorism. But the funny thing is that that's what he wanted. Osama bin Laden never wanted peace in the Middle East. He never wanted freedom for his people because he needed a holy war. He wanted the entire world to submit to Allah. He wanted war with everyone. He didn't care. He's telling you that he doesn't care how many Muslims die, how many of his own friends and family are martyred, that it is morally good that they die. That the slaughter of his own people is exactly what he desires, because it will spurn more people on to fight, and it will weaken the West, etc. It will secure the oil and collapse the Western economy, destroy the world, kill billions, so that, and all of those billions, the evil ones will burn in hell forever. The apostates, the Christians, the Jews, the atheists, you'll all burn for eternity, tortured forever and ever and ever. And he'll smile, happy that you're burned for eternity, because he was able to put forward he's an ego narcissist. He didn't really care about the religion, I think, too much. But assuming he did, he'd be happy, martyred, knowing that the world became enslaved to his God. At least in his belief. And that is what is righteous. It's a death cultist. A death cultist that wants you all dead. And wants your freedoms taken away. Wants you tortured forever for the crime of being a woman or gay or, whatever. Pick your poison other than Muslim. but then accuses us of, racism, white supremacy, anti-environmentalism. Stop. It is he who has sent his messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, with guidance in the religion of truth, Islam, to make it victorious over all other religions, even though the polytheists hate it. Cool. Allah has decreed that verily it is I and my messengers who shall be victorious. Verily Allah is all-powerful, almighty. So again, God says we're going to win, so we're going to win. That's the height of the logic of this individual, this psychopath. The Islamic nation that was able to dismiss and destroy the perilous evil empires like yourself, the nation that rejects your attacks, wishes to remove your evils, and is prepared to fight you. You are well aware that the Islamic nation, from the very core of its soul, despises your haughtiness and arrogance. Again, this collective nonsense of the Islamic nation, whatever that means, that they despise us at every corner and way. I mean, many do. Sure, I guess. Yeah, there is an interesting thing about Afghanistan that I'm reminded of. I think it was Alexander the Great himself said, to fear. There are many things to fear, and like one of them was the claw of the Afghan lion or something. I don't remember the exact quote. I won't try to paraphrase it, but beyond what I just said. But it is true. Afghanistan has always been a place that is impossible to capture. It's a mountainous region. It's only the local population is the only people that are really any good at, being able to maintain and survive with little food and water in those regions. And there's no economy to speak of there other than drug trafficking. So yeah, I mean, they did repel us eventually. We did leave, but of course we're back, right? We'll never leave. So long as the American empire still exists. And so, I mean, in many ways, he is right to fight against the American empire. But God, the idea to justify September 11th, it's justified that it's morally righteous to bomb everybody, or that he actually has any high ground to stand on when he is far more murderous and psychopathic than John Bolton on his worst day is hilarious to me. That's not hilarious. That's sad. But what is hilarious is Gen Z kids discovering this and realizing how much the media is full of shit and has their own pro-empire based narrative, thinking this guy's based because they saw a TikTok from someone that's lying and saying that they read it when they didn't read it, or that they only read excerpts from it, which is hilarious because it's not even a long read. But let's be honest, many of these people just skimmed it and then picked out the section that's supposed to be really good in the very beginning, at least from their perspective, and didn't get to the part where he's talking about murdering all the gays. All right. If the Americans refuse to listen to our advice and the goodness, guidance, and righteousness that we call them to, then be aware that you will lose this crusade Bush began. Just like the other previous crusades in which you were humiliated by the hands of the Mujahideen, fleeing to your home in great silence and disgrace. If the Americans do not respond, then their fate will be that of the Soviets who fled from Afghanistan. You mean the people that we gave you money to fight against? And to deal with their military defeat, political breakup, ideological downfall, and economic bankruptcy. And again, we funded all of these groups that are fighting us and have fought us this entire time. And of course, when we pulled out of Afghanistan, we gave them all our weapons. Well, why is that? Why are the Taliban armed with a massive arsenal of United States weaponry? Why are we sending millions and millions of weapons and money into Turkey for them to immediately sell them to fight, in Syria? Why are there American claymores and America anti-aircraft missiles and mortar systems that Al-Qaeda, newest, older branch, al-Nusra in Syria is using to fight there? It's because we destabilize the region. And he knows that. He knew it then. He knows it in death if he's, with Allah partying, I guess. I don't know. Right? He knew that. He didn't care. He loved the war. He loved playing the role. This was a video game for him. The lives of his people never mattered to him. What mattered to him was going out and being somebody that was worshipped. He was idolatrous. He wanted people to worship him. He was a spoiled rich kid with a Western education that could have been anything, could have been a businessman anywhere, that was not good enough for his family and was a little off, but didn't have the same successes as his brothers. And so he decided to martyr himself. He decided to become a hero. He decided to become a revolutionary, a rebel. And he did so by becoming an Islamic scholar first, of which he was okay. Not that good. He never would have been able to be like a good imam because he just wasn't smart enough for it. He was all right. Maybe if he worked hard, who knows? Utilize his nepotistic connections. But instead, he decided that he wanted to murder people and kill people in the name of Allah. And he took American weapons and money to do it, to drive the Russians out, gain connections and support from wealth and power, and learn and grow, and then continued as the terrorist he was until the day he died. As a leader, full of ego, worshipped by people, because he didn't want people to worship Muhammad. He wanted people to worship him. He was a narcissistic psychopath. He needed love and adoration of people that thought he was a good guy. And so he put out this trash. It's unconvincing. It remains unconvincing to this day. Any logical analysis of this shows the multiple lies and contradictions that is put forward to demand morality from everyone singularly, and that morality be defined by an immoral God that doesn't exist, all whilst taking oil money, American money, taking drug money from the opium trade and hashish, and running into towns and torturing people and murdering families to take them over to fight the Americans, and capturing children to be sold off to wealthy men, wealthy Muslim men, so that they can fuck little kids, because that's what he was really about. Yeah. This is our message to the Americans as an answer to theirs. Do they now know why we fight them, and over which form of ignorance, by the permission of Allah, we shall be victorious? Sure. If you don't understand this bullshit. So there you go. There is a 3-hour reaction to the entire letter, going through things, with a unique libertarian perspective, I hope, breaking down the lies, the bullshit, the stories, the contradictions of the letter that's supposedly so convincing to Gen Z. Appreciate a like, subscribe, share. I know this is a long thing, kind of a podcast format situation where you're just listening to my voice, and hopefully my voice isn't that bad. Hopefully it's soothing. But my message to Gen Z in reading this is that I hope that this is a wake-up call to the insanity of collectivist ideology, and a wake-up call to those of us that are older that say that we mistrust the media and that we don't trust the institutions and the government. That when you look at MAGA tards online and you hate them, maybe you don't understand fully what it is that they lived through, the world that they grew up in. They grew up in this world of propaganda and lies from the American state. These are the people that were young at the time, many of whom were lefties like you, that rejected this notion that we need to be bombing the Middle East, that we need to be wasting $2 trillion. We were the people that saw that the Pentagon magically lost almost $1 trillion plus dollar. I think it was like $1.8 trillion in recording the day before 9/11. We were the people that were 9/11 conspiracy theorists. And then, lo and behold, we were shut down and silenced, and they didn't answer questions that still don't make sense to this day. Obviously, I'm not saying dancing bears, the Jews did it, or I'm not saying anything crazy like that, or that our government did a false flag. But I mean, there are plenty of questions about rogue CIA operations that weren't communicating, that they were trying to utilize and topple regimes over there for the American empire and didn't let people know about, actions, etc., that they themselves funded. I don't know. Or why we went into Iraq and Afghanistan when we kind of all knew that they were Saudi-funded Al-Qaeda. And they were claiming, they claimed it. Al-Qaeda claimed it. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Here's the letter. And yet we've invaded Iraq. Why? Because, I don't know, George Bush needed to. Weapons of mass destruction. WMDs, as Netanyahu was so fond of saying. We saw the lies. We saw the bullcrap. We saw the propaganda. And then they became conservative individualists instead of collectivists like these. Why are you so shocked? This is what collectivism leads to every time. Yes, the magatards have plenty of things that they're wrong about. Yes, this incessant need to fight for, abortion is a dying hill. Yes, they have a lot of problems. But the bed that you're lying in, when you think that this is a morally righteous person, or that this is at least enlightening to you to a certain degree, I think you're gaining the wrong thing by it if you're thinking that this is like, look at how evil America is. Yeah, we all know. That's why the Republicans are anti-war. Stop listening to people that say that they just hate Jews. That's why they're anti-war. And then, of course, there are these people that believe, the evangelical, they control everything. These people are different than the MAGA Republicans. These MAGA Republicans that you hate so much, they don't want to fund this war. And it's not because they hate Jews or they think Jews control everything, like this person you think is cool. This person that you're willing to go through, he wants to kill all the Jews. It's not that. We're sick of losing billions of dollars and not taking care of our own problems. That's what our generation is seeing. We've been through this before. Okay? And we were politically active. We weren't like Gen Xers who were doing cocaine and drinking, letting the world burn when we were your age. And we weren't like the boomers that were, doing anti-war Vietnam protests and then left to go ruin the country and gave up all the things they supposedly learned. We're with you, but your commie garbage collectivist nonsense is the same thing as these terrorists. It's the path to ruin. Don't be like these people. It's time that you embrace and learn about individual freedom. These are not your heroes. Marx is not your hero. Okay? Judith Butler's not your hero. These people you learned about in college that they force-fed down your throat. These people aren't heroes. They're trash academics that make bad arguments that they copied from other people. They regurgitated the same ideas over and over again, like intersectional feminism, like it was this new thing. Ooh, we combined three things we all believed in already into one thing. And then we requoted, Paulo Freire. And then we just didn't use him. We just said it was our idea and nobody cared. Even though he's the number one most cited research social scientist there is in existence. Commie fuck. No. There are geniuses that built this country, that built the Western society, and they had good ideas and we've abandoned those things. But there are some of us who haven't. Some of us over here, the libertarians, some of them are shitposting on Twitter right now saying dumb things. Many of them are. But there are real ones. Rothbard, Mises, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Stefan Kinsella, Walter Block, multiple Friedmans, Jews, a lot of Jews for the record. But we've continued that fight and that philosophical inquiry into individualism, individual thought, individual private property rights, what they mean. Please let this be a wake-up call that this is a death cult. And you are seeing your own people worship and praise a death cultist who's openly a death cultist. That's what you're seeing them openly praise this. Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend and collectivist nonsense. The enemy of my enemy is not my friend. If they're my enemy, and he was. It's about you. It's about individual rights, individual philosophy. These are the things that we need to recognize. And so far as we act as a nation, it is important that we do so to try and protect those ideals to the best of our ability. How do we do that? Well, we don't send funding to Israel. Cut off all funding. But you know what else we do is we don't send funding to Palestine Authority so that Hamas can steal all the water and gas and supplies. We don't fund both sides of a war. What the hell? We call on Israel to end the blockade. We call on Israel to set up blue zones or refugee camps. Call on Egypt to do the same. Call on the Palestinian Authority to come to the table to set up a nation. We use our veto powers and the threat of our veto powers in the United Nations to try and bring these things to the table. We don't steal American money to fund these things. We need to pull out of these places. We don't need to have soldiers ready to go. These are the things we should be fighting on, and these are the things that generally the right and the left can agree on. This from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, calls for ethnic cleansing. Yeah, it makes you sound cool in your college class, but it doesn't help anybody. Nobody's helped by that. It's neither pragmatic nor ethically correct. It's both morally wrong and stupid. Because it's never going to happen. So it's not pragmatic. It's just not. The Muslim world doesn't have the power to fight the West. And if they decide to once again invade Israel, guess what? We'll all be in another fucking world war. So stop it. Make demands that are reasonable. End the blockade. That's a reasonable demand. Allow refugees to move to places where they need to move. That's a reasonable demand. Promise refugees power and water in these places to the best of your ability. These are reasonable. Yes, Palestinians, Palestine Fedayeen, they were in refugee camps. Refugee camps are incredibly problematic and they're horrible places and they cause all kinds of problems. Nevertheless, we should try. Stop funding these things. American taxpaying dollars should not be taken from people, increasing inflation, which also increases, which is another form of taxation on people. While we're having difficulty at the grocery store, we're funding both sides of a war. Stop it. Pull out. Don't be involved in that way. Be involved diplomatically. These are the things that you should be pushing for. This is what libertarians want. Not the why are you on the side of actual terrorists and people in Princeton screaming, globalize the intifada, which essentially translates to kill all the Jews? Why are you on their side? Don't be on their side. And also, don't be on Ben Shapiro's side that cries about how the IDF is so poor and how we all need to send our money to exterminate everyone in Gaza. No. Be rational. Be reasonable. Stop stealing. Be moral. I hope you guys enjoyed this form of content. Kind of like podcasty way feel to it. I liked it. Let me know if you want more things like this. Please like, share, subscribe, comment in the comment section. If you think I got something wrong, if there's something that I missed, God knows it's, this is 21 years ago. And on top of that, it's so much foreign policy here. There's plenty I could have gotten wrong. I didn't stress libertarian philosophy as much, but if there's stuff you'd like to learn, click the links on our YouTube channel you can hop in the Discord. You can ask any questions. I'm fairly active in there. I'm in there at least once or twice a day. checking ats and looking at seeing what people said and, you know, checking my messages and stuff. And there's plenty of cool people in there, libertarians and non-libertarians alike. Just, you know, ignore Peacecraft because he's crazy. and yeah, and you know, give us a follow on Twitter, and see you in the next video.